Hi guys, welcome to the Gentleman's Jury. I'm your host Robbie,
And I'm your co-host Zach.
and with us today is Jerome
Hello.
and Andrew.
Hello.
And before we get started, let's take some time to get to know our guests. Starting with Jerome, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am 22. I live in Oregon. I work with Zach, and I guess Robbie works with us too. I haven't seen him yet. And yeah, I am a hardworking man, I guess. I don't know. I'm American. I don't really know what to say, I'm a
Well,
people.
since we're talking about the two-party system, where
Oh,
are you?
I am a libertarian.
Okay, it's good knowledge to have.
And why don't we give Andrew, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm 23, reaching out here from Indiana. I've got a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from Kansas State University, and I am also libertarian, strongly in the Republican camp in these current times.
And we're sorry, ladies, but he's taken.
All right, so let's go ahead and start off with one of our first topics. I mean, both of you guys, at least from what Zach's told me for you, Jerome, is that you guys have heard our last episode.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't you go ahead and give us some of your perspective on kind of media bias that we were talking about last time.
So I mean, it's hard because it's like all of these media outlets like CNN, Fox News, ABC, all of these people who are supposed to be reporting, what's going on around the country are pretty much owned by special interests, and they really push whatever narrative they are paid to, I guess.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of false information. There's a lot of stretched truths, and just a lot of like turmoil and tension built from that. And it's unfortunate because it's so obvious that this is happening, and it's well known amongst most Americans. Yet they're not being held accountable because it makes money. Hate makes money. That's why we're constantly at war. That's why we're in these little subcultures that don't communicate outside of that subculture. Because if you're a Joe Biden supporter, you'll go buy a Joe Biden hat and a Joe Biden shirt, and you'll talk badly about people who are Trumpers and this, that, and the other. It's like this fad to hate people, and they're making money off of it.
Okay, and how about you, Andrew? What's kind of some of your perspective on this on last episode?
The media definitely plays an integral role in our society, and the beautiful thing is that times change, we evolve, and there's a lot of alternative media sources out right now, especially if you're a conservative looking for some kind of news outlet. Because, I mean, frankly, the media bias has just gotten so ridiculous with the hatred, and because they have to, right? It's the only way to fuel kind of their party right now. And so the really interesting thing after this debate is, or sorry, after this election is that if it does turn out that Joe Biden won, it's going to be really interesting to see who the media paints next because they've kind of dug themselves into a hole. And I think that'll make them really apparent to the American people as irrelevant.
Okay.
And I honestly I agree with you with the digging the hole, and who they paint. I think it all just kind of depends on how, like, if Biden does win, which right now it does look that way. It's they may not be able to, like, paint when you're saying like paint another person. It, I don't think they're going to be able to find one. And I think it also kind of depends on like how it goes. Like if Biden does a good job, they're just going to paint Biden as this hero again. And if he fails, well, what do you do? Do you just try to support a different Democratic, you know?
Well, they've already started painting him as a hero, man. I mean,
Oh yeah,
even
yeah, they have.
before the election happened, I mean, the whole rhetoric was Joe Biden is going to save us from COVID. Despite the fact that literally in the vice presidential debate between Kamala Harris and our
Mike
vice
Pence.
president, Mike Pence. I mean, he asked her, he's like, "So what's your plan then?" And And she basically said word for word what we're already doing. So it's like, they try to hide that fact and pretend that he's some kind of messiah because it's the only way they can. They've already painted Trump as the devil. So
Yeah,
what's the
that's the
answer to the
thing. It's
devil?
just,
It's the messiah.
yeah. Well, it's like all that progress that was made by Trump. Biden's gonna get all the credit because he's gonna be the president that's there when it all like comes together and is seen as a good thing.
I
Yeah,
mean, are we not?
I'm
Sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
Okay, so like on that subject, it's so strange that we see like these effects from like policies that presidents have put in place that for whatever reason the predecessor or the successor of that president somehow gets credit for it, because I mean these policies take a long time to get into effect because I mean this is a massive nation, 350 million people, however many. It
Yeah,
takes a while for things to actually see change, and a lot of the times the policies that presidents put in place you don't really see effect to until a couple years after, if they don't get a second term, they get out of office, and the person who is now in their place gets credit for that.
yeah, and it's a shame to be honest, and it's like it's credit for something you did nothing for, and it's hard to see a party get that that glory for nothing.
Well, so look, we've got a really ugly example right now that's like extremely apparent. If you could take 2 seconds and look it up. The Pfizer vaccine, right? It gets
Yep.
announced 2 days after the election,
Yeah.
right? When questioned, the Pfizer CEO says, "No, we were not a part of Trump's program, Operation Warp Speed. We didn't take any government money in this." So basically, trying to say Trump doesn't get any credit. And then they had to retract that literally like a day later, because it turns out no, they didn't receive any upfront money, but the government has already placed like billions of orders for these vaccines, so they were in fact receiving money, and
Yeah.
so they had to recant. And it's like, I mean, I don't know how more obvious it gets than that, you know.
Yeah.
Right,
I know Trump pushed for that. Like he pushed big time for a cure. Like he was like, I'm putting out a bounty for a cure, basically.
Yeah, and so they benefiting from that, and then they try to immediately say, no, we didn't actually benefit from that." And so
Yeah.
why? What's the point in that? Just so they could spin it for Biden? Like,
Yeah.
it's just
Demonize.
suspicious, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
I don't understand the gain from lying about things like this. Like, what's the point? I mean, especially with something so critical as what COVID-19 is being painted as. Um, it, it, I don't understand why we can't be just transparent about what's going on and who's doing what for the effort.
Well, because then they can't spin that to suit their needs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but it's so insane to me. These people who we have like pretty much hired through taxes to protect us are pretty much at war with us.
Yeah. It's all about that ideal situation for them. They don't care. All they care about is reelection, and they don't care who gets hurt by it.
right,
And go ahead, Rob.
and I was going to say, and that's kind of the systematic problem with having this kind of duopoly with two parties, is that what we're seeing right now is kind of I mean, it's um you, I guess the point I'm trying to get at is that because it's between two parties, it broadens out the problems. And a question that I was going to ask is do you think that if we had split these into like multiple parties, do you think that media bias and kind of the taking of credit for other presidents and other politicians' work, do you think that'll kind of like it'll be less what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of like
Less apparent.
yeah, less apparent. It starts becoming more of a collective.
I honestly think it will be. I think smaller groups, it makes it harder to control multiple groups. When it's narrowed down to two, I feel like the ability to control them is much simpler than if I'm trying to control 12 different groups of people. Like hopefully 12 isn't like the actual number because it's quite a bit that you would have to do a lot of research on, and the votes would definitely be spread out big time between 12, and it would be almost hard to find any president that we accepted. But that's one of the benefits, I would say, of the duopoly, is that basically who does win in that system is almost guaranteed to have the popular vote. It's not always that way, but it's the guaranteed thing. So then the majority are represented. Now with multiple parties, that may not be the case.
But even with the duopoly, the popular vote doesn't doesn't
No,
dictate who wins. I
no,
mean,
it does not. It's,
Hillary
it's all
Clinton
about
had
those
the
electoral.
popular vote over Trump in 2016, another big popular vote win. Al Gore had the popular vote over George W. Bush in 2000.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
obviously the popular vote doesn't matter because then those people would have been in office and their version of representation would have been,
Yeah.
or they would have been representing us. So
Right, and the whole popular vote, electoral college, that stuff is very interesting because 200 years ago, the forefathers of America who wrote all these laws and the Constitution, um, they didn't expect 30 million people cities to pop up,
Yeah.
because the problem is that you have a vastly different mentality when you're in a crowded populace. And the fact that those, like here in Oregon always votes blue, and the reason for that is because of Portland and Salem. Those are in Eugene. All three of those cities are super democratic, and it's proven that big cities are mainly democratic. um, and the reason for that is because of the amount of homeless that large cities accumulate. Because for whatever reason, living in dense populations with a lower quality of living costs more, um, and it causes these issues. And people think that, okay, well, if I vote Democratic with all these promises that are being told to me by these candidates, it sounds like they'll get rid of the homeless problem. They'll make minimum wage higher, but they don't take into account what those, like raising minimum wage, and what ripple effect that has on the economy, and it's just going to create more issues.
Yep.
Um,
Well,
and,
so I actually kind of disagree with you on that. On your point about the founders there, I would actually say that they had tremendous foresight.
You hold up. You're
well,
falling
yeah,
off,
we
man.
can't hear you.
You
Oh,
fell off, man.
hello.
Yeah.
Okay, try it again. Try it again.
Okay, sorry. I was going to say that I disagree with you on that point about the founders. I'd actually say that it's quite the opposite. I'd say they had tremendous foresight about what was going to be the leading issues in the country moving forward, and I'd say that's exactly why they created, um, the system as it is currently, is because having the electoral college specifically allows areas that are less population dense to have a say in the course of the country, as opposed to the pure, majoritarian mentality, which would just be literally the cities dictating how the country runs. And I mean, when you look at the histories of the parties, right? I mean, the Democratic Party was always for big possession. And
you're
Yeah.
cutting out again.
You're
You
cutting
fell
out
out again.
again. But I'll bring this up with the foresight of the cities becoming a big, big. I can agree with that. But do you think they had the foresight to see the problems with it, of basically Americans becoming reliant on the government rather than it being a guideline? Because I believe when
No,
they came up, they never wanted the government to be what ran everything.
I
no,
think
they
they knew
didn't.
that people would try. I
Yeah. Oh,
think that
yeah.
was definitely. I think they absolutely knew that people would try to make the government daddy,
You're cutting out
and
again.
that's.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know what the difference is currently. Is that better?
Yeah.
yeah, that's a lot better.
This is a lot
Okay.
better.
Well, I'm saying that they absolutely did.
And then he
That's
got
why all these
worse.
checks and balances exist.
I believe that was to minimize the possibility of corruption. I don't think what they saw was that the people would even turn on the government, in the sense of, yeah, let's give them all the power. And if the people give up that right of, self-reliance, and they're like, well, just give it to the government, the checks and balances don't work in that sense, because the checks and balances were to be what the people wanted, basically.
Well,
Right.
literally with the founding fathers. I mean, so one of the big things, right, is Jefferson. He was a big supporter of the French Revolution,
Yep.
right? And the French Revolution at the time was this big utopian movement that basically sought to create an authoritarian government that would provide for the people.
Yeah.
And Jefferson actually tried to implement those kinds of things here. So I mean, that's literally a founding father. So I definitely say they were aware of this kind of issue. And Hamilton rejected that thoroughly,
Yeah.
and he was one of the staunch supporters of having a minimalist government. I mean, literally the first two parties were Federalist and Anti-Federalist.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, that was the basic argument that we've been having since the beginning: is do we have a big government or a small government?
Right,
Right.
and historically too, the first president, like I brought up in the first video, his very first thing one of the big things he addressed on his way out was, "Hey guys, these party systems are what tear us apart," and then we jump right into that, right into parties, with the first president, or the president succeeding him being a Federalist, and then swapping back and forth. And to kind of get back into the topic of how the Electoral College has kind of some downsides too, is like Jerome and Zach were saying, Oregon is always swinging blue because of the population centers of Portland, Eugene, and Salem. And a lot of us Central Oregonians who live in like Bend, Prineville, Redmond, people who live in Eastern Oregon, they don't feel like they're getting represented at all. So
How
how
do you
does the
rectify
Electoral
that?
College help rectify that?
Right. So, and that's the point that I was trying to make, is that not necessarily that we take, like, we get rid of the electoral college, because yes, there are states like Montana and Idaho that have smaller populations than California or the whole Western Seaboard, and that's obvious, and they definitely need equal representation. I think that what we need to do is obviously our government in a lot of sections needs a lot of reform. And the way I think that we need to reform the electoral college is, if a city is, let's say, over 1 million people, then they should be like their own subcategory of electoral votes, and
So
then
kind
Well,
and then the rest of the state that's a smaller population, like, would somehow split the electoral votes, and where it would divvy up to between the large cities, like all the large cities would take half of the electoral votes, and then all the smaller cities would take half of those electoral votes, and then that way, like, we could say, okay, well, half of Oregon voted red, half of Oregon voted blue, and then we could split them, like, accordingly, because right now these states are being dominated by Democratic voters because they're in those high population cities. And I
Yeah.
mean, even this year, Texas almost went blue because
Yep.
Austin and San Antonio are massive Democratic cities now, and Dallas, all three of their biggest cities are super Democratic now, and that almost made the entire state go blue. And that's never happened before.
yeah, it's from
Nope.
people moving out from California.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's that. And it's strange too, on that topic of Californians moving places, right? Because I was born and raised in Southern California. I grew up in Orange County, Surf City, USA, big city, had like 20 million people in it. I hated it. I hated every second of it. So I left. And then, I discovered the Libertarian Party, and I started doing more research into it. And then that's kind of what I aligned with more, because, in high school, like a lot of other high schoolers, you're more democratic because you're like, yeah, love for everybody. And, you want everyone to have equal rights and stuff like that, which, I mean, you still do. But it's not as, like, easy as they make it seem when you're in high school, like, taking in that information. Like Bernie Sanders and his old platform, a free college and free everything for everybody, it just doesn't work.
Yep.
Uh, and so when I started learning that, and when I moved from California, I lived in Kentucky for a while, and I've lived in Oregon for the better part of my adult life. I lived in Vegas, so I've traveled around the country a lot, and pretty much everywhere is better than California. And it's strange that these people leaving this, like, pretty much being refugees of this corrupt state that is taxing them into poverty, and they go to these other states like Texas, Oregon, Idaho, and they want to change the legislation to fit what California is, and kind of just replicate that toxic environment that they were in. It's like a Stockholm syndrome, but for a massive population of people.
Yeah. It's like, if it didn't succeed there, why would you try to repeat the exact same thing? Obviously, it didn't work, and that's why you left. Why would you vote the same way? Why would you think it would be any different?
Right.
See, the problem is people don't understand these things. They don't actually know, what exactly the cause was.
They don't
Right.
go out.
Um,
They don't go
Right.
out and do the research to find out what caused
well,
it.
and of course, the media is not talking about this kind of stuff. So if you're a person who doesn't have a whole lot of time in your day, and you've got maybe time for one media source, and you get your news twice a week, right? You're gonna end up on one of these legacy media sites,
Hmm.
or you're gonna watch the news on cable, and that's the only source of information that you're really gonna have, and that's most people. And so that's kind of how people get into these bubbles, is because they've got no way out of it, and they don't necessarily have the time to do independent research.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna counter that and say that's not necessarily true anymore, thanks to the internet, right? Internet's a huge source of information now, and a big problem coming with that, the counterpart of the internet is fake news, false information and false narratives that are being passed around and constantly spread amongst people on all these social media sites. But for an average person between the ages of 18 to probably 40 now are pretty tech savvy, and they use social media, and they're really quick at researching things on the internet. So if you find a source, the biggest problem is that a lot of people will be like, oh, okay, well, Fox News told me this or CNN told me this, so it must be true because they're the news, right? Especially the older generations. They grew up. The news told you the truth. The news was, end all be all of whatever information you get, and it's not the case anymore. Now we're realizing that they just push narratives, and they're pretty much just trying to cause conflict.
Yeah.
Right, but
Um,
that's sorry to interrupt, but that's
I agree.
that kind of contradicts the point that it's the internet only spreading fake news, because those cable news companies like Fox and CNN, like you said, are pushing those false narratives, and it you get this kind of like you were saying, you get these people that only get to listen to one or two, and then they go and fact check it on the internet, and then you get more of the same. So the real
It,
problem
it
is
it may not be fake news, but instead like a fake mentality that's going on where they're withholding certain information, even though this information they're giving you is true. They're withholding the opposite sides, so that way they can give you this narrative.
Right. And, like what I was trying to say is that one of the big problems with social media is this hate bias. Okay, so because this whole bias
Uh,
of news information being fed to people has been around since newspapers were invented, since the spread of information. There's always been a bias. Okay, people always stretch the truth. It's just that right now, with technology and all these extremely sophisticated algorithms that are going into social media platforms and your news feed of just anything, your emails, those little notifications you get about, oh, what's happening in the news today. That's all directed to you and what you like, what your bias is and what you like to watch. So if you're a left person, you're going to only see things that the left support. You're not going to see anything that contradicts what you believe in, which is a problem because people need contradiction. Where right now, if you don't believe in someone's position on something, or if you don't agree with it, they call you a bigot, they call you stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, oh, that's fake news. And it's this constant argument that's going on between everybody in the nation, and it's a massive problem that
yeah.
people aren't really aware of because it's just a passive thing that happens.
So
Yeah.
on the topic of the algorithms, I want to point something out here real quick. Um, so all of these algorithms are left leaning, right? And this is really apparent if you don't take the time to look up conservative outlets. By default, you're gonna see left outlets. I mean, if you go onto Google right now, go to incognito mode, and you Google um, literally anything about like Joe Biden, your first sources are going to be CNN.
Right.
I mean, and Ben Shapiro actually talked about this a couple days ago on his show, and he referenced it as the iron trifecta, right? Your iron triangle between the Democratic Party, the mainstream media, and now social media companies, because this free expression of ideas on the internet that we're talking about is sort of the antidote to the mainstream media. They see that as a problem, and that's why you have these sort of crackdowns on information like with the Joe Biden or the Hunter Biden laptop. I mean, we, we saw Twitter silence the president of the United States.
Well, he
I
silenced the New
mean,
York Times too. They didn't care who they
watch.
silenced for it.
Yeah, and that's the whole problem here is uh, you have to be careful too on the internet because it's exactly like you're saying. You're going to end up seeing what they want you to see, and then you're going to click on that, and that's going to make them think that that's what you want to see more of, and that they're just going to keep showing you the same thing.
Yeah,
So really, we need to be pushing for people to do their own sort of research, look around, and just know that there are more options out there. And I think that's really only the best solution that we can propose.
See,
yeah.
but even that, so what's the main search engine everybody uses? It's Google, right?
Google. Hmm.
Okay, so
By far.
the issue is that Google tracks your information, okay, and they give you targeted ads. What you see at the top of the search result may not be what best fits what you're searching accurately information wise, but what best fits your narrative that you like to see, which is a huge problem. So there are other websites like DuckDuckGo, which I use personally, that doesn't do that. They do have advertisements because they have to pay for their website and their infrastructure, which is fine. But they don't use these algorithms that target you specifically and give you ads on, oh, I'm talking to my friend about a purple mattress, and I immediately get an ad while scrolling through Facebook. Okay, that's
Yeah,
insane. Why is that a thing? Or I get a notification from Amazon saying, "Oh, purple mattresses are 20% off right now. You should buy one." Like,
Did you see the
why?
ads on YouTube too?
Yeah, it's on everything,
Yeah.
man. Everything. It is insanity. Why
yeah.
is this? Why is it okay for these private companies to listen in through our devices that we use commonly every day and steal this information and this this medieval instinct to, I see something, I want it, and then they give it to you. It
Yeah.
That hits me personally because we just shopped for a mattress too, and we had that happen.
Yeah,
It's kind
man.
of
Oh,
creepy.
And I, 4 years ago when I turned 18, I was looking for health insurance. I have not stopped getting calls and advertisements or emails for health insurance. Okay, they will
dude,
not
I'm
leave me
dealing with
alone.
that with car insurance
It's
right now
funny.
because I need a new one.
It's funny too because when I was setting up everything for this podcast, when I was looking into different mics, and you know, I'm now getting targeted with, "Hey, do you know that this mic performs this well?" Or, "Hey, do you know that this website will help you record?" That's how. I mean, that's even how I came across Zencaster, which is what we record off of right now. It's so it's ridiculous how easy it is for them to just look at one search or maybe two searches or a couple small things and then push that narrative. Um, but
Well, I
uh,
remember hearing stories about fathers finding out their daughters are pregnant after like Macy's and like other bigger like stores start hitting them up on like was it baby clothes or vitamin supplements for when they're pregnant and stuff. And dad being infuriated by the fact that they're getting these, and they're like, "My daughter's not pregnant," and talking to the corporations, well, they're like, "Well, your daughter was looking this and this up, which indicates she's probably pregnant," and then come to find out she's pregnant.
Yeah, it's a huge invasion of privacy. The same thing with what Edward Snowden came out with from the CIA. He's a whistleblower for the Big Brother program,
Yep.
and they aggressively denied it for a decade until recently. The federal courts had ruled that it was unconstitutional what they were doing, and it was completely illegal for the CIA to be surveilling all of the American citizens because they were trying to argue the point that, okay, well, we're doing this. You guys are sacrificing your freedom for us to be able to stop terrorism after 9/11, right?
Yeah.
And then the courts were like, okay, well, show us what you've done with this, and we'll see if it was constitutional or not. They almost caught one thing that one of their departments was already investigating, and they were about to raid on this terrorist group. And without Big Brother, they still would have stopped them before they did anything. So they did literally nothing but collect information on the entire population for over a decade, and it's what's happening with this private company now too. And that's why, after watching after watching the documentary The Social Dilemma, if you guys haven't seen it, I recommend watching it because I think we all inherently know that, this is an issue. Like, we've all noticed, like I said, those targeted ads when you talk about something and you get an ad for it. It's
Yep.
obvious that it's going on, but it's so, like, eye-opening when you see these people who created these algorithms and created these systems that target you, and how they talk about how it's a vicious animal that is just trying to get into the deepest parts of your brainstem and make you do whatever they want
I
passively.
mean,
Yeah.
on that whole Big Brother thing, we can go back to, Ben Franklin, right?
Mhm.
Any people's willing to sacrifice freedom for security deserve neither.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and that's totally true. And this is for me, being a libertarian, and Andrew, I'm sure you feel the same way. The whole Second Amendment thing, right? I think that the Constitution needs to be reformed in a certain way, where like we have, right, the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. Okay, you can say and do whatever you want, but the problem is that, well, what happens if ISIS comes in on Twitter or Facebook and starts trying to recruit these terrorists? Is that an issue of national security, and do we nip that in the butt? And with these private companies, Twitter, Facebook, um, Instagram, Reddit, they can silence whoever they deem worthy of being
Yeah.
silenced, no
To
matter
have
what
Hmm.
that
they're
freedom.
talking about. And that's
Yeah.
what you
Well, we're
talked about
talking about
earlier.
removing those protections.
What do you mean removing them?
Oh,
Oh,
so
taking it from the private companies?
yeah. So that has to do with actually a current movement that's underway. Basically, there was a law passed that gave them the ability to regulate speech that's on their platforms as long as it's in good faith. And so, obviously, people are starting to feel like they've been abusing that, and so the current movement is to actually take away those protections.
Yeah.
And then if they choose to start regulating people, then they would have to classify themselves as like actual media outlets, and then they're under a whole different set of regulations. So it's interesting to see that between us two libertarians here, we still have pretty different views because now I'm a staunch constitutionalist. So I believe you guys could notice this already, but I've kind of been defending the Constitution every step of the way here.
Yeah.
Right.
And
And I
so,
think.
I
And
absolutely believe that there should be no regulation whatsoever on free speech, as the founders intended. Because the
Yeah.
counter to that is the ability to have opposing thoughts, right? And so once you start putting any kind of regulation on that, you limit people's ability to respond to this. And then so really it comes down to whoever holds power is the one that gets to decide who gets to speak. So I don't think we should put any kind of limitations. And yes, you run the risk of organizations like ISIS looking out to recruit people. But I think the benefits of being able to say, well, those ideologies are poison, outweigh the potential dangers.
Yeah.
So, and I agree with you in a sense, right? So it's on paper that makes a lot of sense, and I 100% believe in that. The issue is that in the reality we live in right now, again with these algorithms that target things, if you have these teenagers and they don't like America, they want free stuff, whatever, and then ISIS comes in and says, "Hey, we want to take down America because they're an evil government and they hate all of you, and we're going to make it better," then they're going to only see those types of things, and then they're going to 100% believe in it. They're still not going to see those opposing thoughts. So the freedom of speech thing and being able to see both sides of it, I totally agree with. But until we can stop these companies from doing these targeted ads and these targeted news feeds, that's not going to be beneficial. It's going to cause more issues than it's going to like eliminate.
Yeah.
the problem with attempting to do something like that is that you run the risk of reform. Like if you start like you were saying, reforming the Constitution in order to make it easier for us to hold these companies to this like level of standard, then you start running the risk, like Andrew was saying, that it starts becoming tyrannical. The other side of that too is you need, as a person, as a well-rounded individual, it's up to you to um, kind of try and find an opposing view. I was in the army for 3 years as an intel analyst, and one of the first things they teach you when you're getting intel to prepare for a commander is it cannot be a single source, it can't be two sources, it needs to be at least three sources that say roughly the same thing to kind of be the verifying feature. I mean, like when they take out terrorist cells in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, that's how they do it. They find three sources that identify that particular person as who they need to as who they are, what they're doing, and that's how we kind of and and that's all an accountability thing. And I think that's a major issue today in American society and in American politics is that while we're talking about all these ways of holding these companies accountable, what we also need to do is start holding ourselves accountable to the ideals that we want these companies to live up to.
Right.
Well,
And
it's
so, you go, Andrew.
oh, I was just gonna say that it's really funny you bring up that triplicate number because, like I said, I've got a bachelor's in microbiology. So for 3 years, I did cancer research, and that's kind of the rule we live by too. You got to repeat every experiment in triplicate to even have
Yeah,
a chance at saying that what you found is, verifiable or fact.
yeah. I think it's a good policy to go by. Now, since I wanted to bring it up a little bit earlier when Jerome was talking about the Electoral College and reforming it, uh, I had my own kind of view on that of like a way to represent both city and rural areas, since it seems that rural areas are not being represented in the elections.
Hmm.
And if
Oh, I've got a counter to that, by the way.
Already?
go
Wow.
ahead, go ahead and counter, and then I will give my idea.
Yeah, so I mean, I just wanted to let you know ahead of time. Well, you guys mentioned Oregon, so I did a quick Google search, and so
Been through
you're
it.
saying that the rural sections aren't being represented, but the way that we have our representatives set up is they're by districts, right? And so I mean, even though you have this pretty overwhelming Democrat I guess authority in Oregon, you still have to take into account there is in fact a Republican Party representative from the state of Oregon. And then if you look at the Oregon House itself, so like the state house, I mean 22 out of the 60 delegates there are Republicans. So that
Well,
kind of is
let
the
me hit you
rural
with let
vote.
let me hit you with the true fact there. Uh, Portland, all those smaller ones, or the big cities, all they care about is the presidential debate, and that's all they focus on. They don't focus on the smaller senators and House of Representatives as much. They focus more on the president, and that I've seen that in our television. There's almost no ads for candidates on there, so rural does get to win that one because we pay attention more than they do towards that.
Well, I
And
was just gonna
I
say,
go
like
ahead.
going back to your point about or some whoever's point it was about splitting the electoral votes. I think that's something that we need to see more, and that's personally my solution because we
For,
do see that there is in fact representation of the whole state. It's just like you said, it's not reaching the presidential level.
Yeah. So it's like, why
Right.
not do it by percentages, like the populist percentage, you know? So if
Interest.
50% went towards Democrat, 50% of the votes should go towards Democrat, and if 40% went to Republican, 40% of those electoral votes go to Republicans, you know?
Interestingly enough, not to cut in too much, two states already kind of do that. That's Nebraska and I believe it's
Didn't
Maine,
Maine do that
Maine or
this year?
Vermont.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
looked at
yeah, I
Maine
saw
did that this
that
year.
where they split the electoral votes because
Right,
I saw like
because
Biden got like 2 and Trump got like 4 or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Nebraska it was 3 for Trump, 1 for Biden, and for Vermont or Maine, I don't remember which one. It was 2 and I think it was like 2 and 1,
Hmm.
and and we kind of and those states are probably a little bit more represented now in the electoral college because of that.
Yeah, I feel like they're more satisfied with what was decided that way.
So I mean, my point is that these systems are in place. I just don't think we're utilizing them properly. I think
Well,
the fact that the entirety of a state's electoral college vote goes to a single candidate is abuse of the system
I
that's
think it is.
already in
And
Yeah,
place.
I
that's
And
why.
so
Okay, go ahead, Jerome.
okay, so like my biggest issue and one of the reasons why I really like move towards the libertarian I guess because I mean I believe in what I believe in, right? But the proper category to put me in would be libertarian.
Yeah.
If if it was a Democrat, then I would consider myself a Democrat, Republican, so on and so forth. Uh, I think that the biggest issue is that anything that the federal government does always gets abused. Okay, so welfare, right?
Absolutely.
Me and Zach have talked about this at work. We talk about this
Yep.
stuff all the time.
Yep. Yep.
Welfare is a problem because there are actual people who just have as many kids as they can have, and then they just collect government funding. and they don't do anything. They don't contribute to society. They don't pay taxes, and it ends up being these people in these more rural areas that aren't being represented in the presidential election that are um, paying for this and don't benefit from it.
Yep.
And it's unfortunate because uh, it's in more of these democratic high density populations that this is being abused. Same thing with the unemployment. The unemployment got severely abused with the CARES Act, even more so than it was before. Same thing with the PPP that they brought out for small businesses. A lot of that money that these businesses, that this PPP Act, the money that they found allotted to small businesses struggling due to COVID, was eaten up by these bigger companies that didn't need it because they didn't stop working. But they had a
Yep.
low number of employees, and they were still able to qualify for it because of the loopholes that they were able to find in these applications and receive millions of dollars that they don't have to pay back, and that these other smaller businesses could have used way more than they did.
Yep.
And it's everything. I mean, it's same thing with the electoral college. It gets abused because it's a part of the federal government.
It basically turns into taxation without representation
I
Right,
think I
with
exactly.
think
that.
a big part of that though is because I'm huge on accountability, and I feel like we continue to not hold these people in these systems to the level of accountability that they should be.
Yeah.
And
Right. And I think that's the same thing that with cops. Me and Zach were talking about this yesterday. Is that we were discussing how, with some other coworkers, is that why is everyone talking about, defunding the police, get rid of the police? We need to reform the police, and we need to add some sort of secondary branch, a third party that regulates the police, because it's an issue when you have a problem with misconduct of a police officer. Who do you go to report that? You go to the police, right? That's a conflict of interest.
Well, I
Um,
mean, there is internal affairs in police.
Right, they're internal affairs, and there is this camaraderie between police. I've known so many cops throughout the
Yeah.
years where if you're a cop or if you work with cops, you protect cops no matter what. That's why
So
there's always issues.
my only complaint with the police currently is in fact police unions. So I'm staunchly against public unions. Unions that
Oh,
are in the public sector. So, for instance, teachers unions, the police unions. I think if you're a federal worker, you shouldn't be able to join a union.
so I
Right,
Um,
guess just to clarify, for other people, what you're saying is unions specifically for public works like teachers, cops, and not
city,
DHS.
necessarily
city,
things like
yes,
city.
no, no.
electricians, plumbers,
Private
and
unions are perfectly a-okay because you have to engage in collective bargaining with companies that refuse to engage in interpersonal bargaining. Because I mean, that's literally the whole change that's happening right now. Is companies are trying to move away from unions by engaging in interpersonal bargaining, right? So you have to have that personal bargaining, otherwise you force people into collective bargaining. So private sector unions are perfectly fine, but you can't allow public sector unions because you're dealing with people whose money it isn't. Like, all right, so the money doesn't belong to whoever's making the deal with the union representative, and
Right,
so that means that they're not going to care nearly as much about fighting, for or fighting against any sort of abuse of power from the union because again, it's not their money. So, for example, right now I work for a company, and they've got a union, and so this is a food company, right? And so the union representative in the company comes down and they have a negotiation, I think yearly,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so the company's whole plan out here is to give away as little as possible, and the union's goal is to take as much as possible, right? But when you look at the public sector, right, the union still has that goal is to take as much as possible, but there's no counter to that
yeah.
from the
There's no
official
one trying.
representatives.
Yeah, yeah,
right.
There's no one trying to stop them, and so that's how you end up with these abuses of power, such as in the teachers union, and the police union, because it's really hard to fire a cop thanks to the police unions because they have all of these benefits that they were able to fight for that nobody stopped them.
yeah,
Right. No, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think, again, like you were saying, the way to fix this is to make it to where there is a flame underneath them, where they have to make sure that what they're doing is right and not, they're not just trying to grab for money, and they don't really care about what happens in the long run. Because we're all a part of a union too, and we just had our negotiations, and our union's really good. They always try to negotiate for better wages due to inflation. They try to keep us at a livable wage with no matter what. If the economy starts to go down, our wages will like accommodate that, right? Um, and that's the nice part about private unions. And I think this is also the problem with governors and senators and just everybody in government, state or federal, is that they're not held to the consequences of their actions, right? So I don't think
Because it's
that
not their money.
right, exactly. I don't think the governor of California should be a millionaire, right? With how terrible of a state it is right now. I think that they should be paid based on how well their state is doing and how well the income like the state income tax is benefiting the state, how they're benefiting the schools, the children,
Yeah.
how they're keeping the cops, well paid and taken care of. The other thing I think is a problem again with the cops is that not only do we have this, like you said, this public union that they're a part of, where we can't fire bad cops, right? Everyone says, "Oh, why don't we just evaluate them, find the bad cops, and get rid of them?" It's not as easy as that, because with the
I mean,
union,
it does
again,
happen, but it's not easy.
yeah, it
Yeah.
happens, but not as often as it should, right? There's a lot of bad cops out there.
Yeah.
I've met a lot of them, but I've also met a lot of good cops, right?
I
They're
do want to
people.
say I'm very pro cop.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want
So
to
so
get
so
that
am
out
I.
there.
I do
Yeah.
not think
There's
we
good
should get
cops.
rid of cops at all. Okay, I've met a lot of good cops. I've also met a lot of really shitty cops. It just depends on the person because we're people. You can't really control how they feel or what they do. You're your own person, right? We have consciousness.
Yeah.
Uh,
They have experiences, etc., etc.
I think one of the biggest problems is, like with the Derek Chauvin case with George Floyd, is that guy was in the force for 20 years, right? And they only do one mental health check when they get hired on. And that's a huge problem. And I
Yeah.
think we should be doing this for EMTs, any first responders, firefighters, if they're in it,
If there's any major event that happens,
if there's any major event, they should immediately go see like their office's therapist, right? That should be
yeah,
normal. That should be
Right.
provided. And I think that at least twice a year, even if no major thing happens, they should still talk to a therapist because cops work a lot of overtime because there is a lot of overtime and that's where they make their money, which I think is super wrong.
yeah,
I think they should be getting paid a well enough wage to where they don't have to go for that overtime. It's still there, and if they want to do it, that's awesome. I think there should be a cap on how much
yeah,
overtime they want. You don't want a cop that's on an 80-hour night shift pulling you over, all right, for speeding because he's going to be a dick.
yeah,
And it's a problem that we're not checking up on them. And then you have this 20-year long run with this guy who's fed up with it and he doesn't care anymore, and he keeps his knee on this guy's neck for 8 minutes and he kills him. And then it
yeah.
sparks all these riots, all this hate, and it just adds to this fire that's been burning for decades in the U.S. All that starts at the basic level of like mental health care
Yeah.
for these public workers and EMTs. I know EMTs too, man, and they have PTSD really bad because they see some of the worst stuff, man. They see suicides, they see mutilations, they see bad car crashes, and they're never checked up on and
No.
they're super messed up from it, and it's not their fault because they want to do this job because they care about people and they want to help the community, but the community doesn't help them, and
Yeah.
that's really unfortunate.
Well, you got to be really careful when you're talking about people's overtime and stuff like that, though, because you've got to remember that people are also like you said, they kind of depend on that, and so even if you paid them more, they would still want to like a certain percentage of them would still want to work that overtime,
Well, that's why
and so
you
that's
don't.
where
Yeah,
you kind of run into the issues of public union versus private union is so again like your company is trying to pay you guys as little as possible because that's just the standard goal. We all kind of accept that, right?
Yeah.
right. So,
Um,
so yeah, I mean, here, to butt in, here's my thing with that is I'm not saying completely get rid of cops overtime. So, like for an example, with our union, right? We work for an electrical union. The
Yeah.
most overtime we work is 6 10-hour days. Okay, 60 hours. I've had jobs where I got paid way less than what I am right now, where I was working 84 hours a week at night. Okay, and I was making terrible money because
Oh
that's
yeah.
all I could do, right? And it's nice that we have that option of overtime when it does come and we need it. and we can work that overtime. Or if we don't want to, we don't have to work that overtime. But I think 60 hours is a nice cap. I don't think any person that wants to be healthy, that wants to have good mental health and have a good relationship with, their personal life, friends, family, whatever have you, or even just relaxing, I don't think any normal person should be forced to work 80 hours a week because they need to pay
Yes.
their bills, right? And that's where I was saying we need to like accommodate these public servants' wages to where they don't have to do that. They have the option of working up to 60 hours a week, but I don't think they should be working 80, 90 hours a week just so they can pay their bills.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying I don't think they're going to be in support of a cap. Like that's just my basic there. Like
No one's ever in support of a cap, but I think if it comes with such a big amount, like if the pay increase is good enough, I think they'll accept it or at least be more accommodating towards it. But I feel like you are right. When a cap is negotiated, no one's going to be happy about it because they're going to be like, well, what if I need that extra money? What if I'm
I
really
I
well, like
think
needing it?
want
I
it, you
think
know.
I think it should be like again. So what I see right is that the way that the country was supposed to run is that we have the federal government as the backbone for the people, right?
Yeah.
And then you
Yeah.
have the state government at each different level that is supposed to regulate that state. And then you decide on, okay, well, like in Oregon, we just decriminalized all drugs and we legalized psilocybin mushrooms for medicinal purposes, right? That should be fine at a state level, but we shouldn't be able to have federal agents come in and raid, mushroom shops and weed shops and then take all their money and then just leave and
Oh
destroy
yeah.
their business. That's
Yeah.
super wrong. I don't think the federal government should be allowed to do that. I think that the federal government is there to regulate states from abusing power on their citizens. I don't think the federal government should be allowed to abuse their power on every
On the.
citizen.
Yeah.
Right,
That's
but
Yeah.
that's a huge problem.
then
But
essentially all you
sorry, I just want to finish this thought. So on that, I'm thinking that the federal government should be able to pass some sort of a labor law where you shouldn't be allowed to work more than 60 hours a week. Because, like I said, I've worked a lot of jobs where I've worked way more than that, man, and it
Yeah.
is horrible on your mental health. It's bad for your health in general. You're never like I was never happy when I was doing that. Even when I was
No.
making a lot of money, I made almost 100 grand last year at the age of 20. Okay. But I was working 80 hours a week and I was managing a crew of 25, 30 people. And it was extremely stressful. And my home life was you know,
There was
like
none.
there really wasn't one. Yeah. It was really degrading. I wasn't happy when I came home. I wasn't happy going to work. I was working 6, 7 days a week. And the money's nice. I needed the money to pay my bills and to work towards my future, but it shouldn't be required to where we have to do that.
Yeah. You
Okay, so
shouldn't be.
hold on. I really got to say something there because, you're coming at this like you literally just said it right there. We shouldn't have to do that, right? And so my issue is that this is a land of freedom, right? And the whole point is that you're able to make your own personal decisions. So I'm not trying to be insensitive here, but you didn't have to necessarily do that. Like, there's always
I was
the
gonna say
opportunity to leave the company.
for his crew, it was you're fired if you don't do it. So I
Well, yeah,
think
but that's why it's at will employment, right? Like you
Right.
can just go get another job. And I know that's like it's not a great thing to say because I'm actually in the process of doing that right now. Um, but I mean, that's the truth of it, right? That's where the freedom comes in, is that they
it's like,
have the
well,
freedom to offer
do
you this position to work
yeah,
and
but it's like,
like that.
do I lose my house because I need a new job or because I hate this job?
Right,
Uh,
yeah, that's the
yeah,
problem is the cost of living in some of these places
yeah,
and where you want to be and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, well, you can move somewhere else, but I think the ultimate goal in life as a person is to be happy, right? And so you want to be where you want to be, but the problem is the finances, and the
Well, you
reason for
can't
that
make people
right.
pay you things, so that's the
no,
problem.
no, I
And
don't
yeah,
think you should. Right? I'm not saying that that a McDonald's worker should be making $100,000 a year. That's not right. You should be paid accordingly for the work that you do. Right?
Well, and that's
I
but
personally
some
negotiated or
yeah,
collectively negotiated through a union. That like
right.
yeah.
that's the whole point, though. Is sorry, but that's coming off a little socialist, so I've got to chime in.
I
No,
guess
no, I'm not.
you
I'm not
guys.
saying like I'm not. I am nowhere near an advocate for universal basic income. I don't think that's a good idea. I honestly think we should lower minimum wage. I
Agreed.
well,
because
it's not the minimum wage that's the problem that's causing all of this this
Inflation.
the inflation and everything. What's causing that is the level of government spending versus the amount of taxing they have to do and the continuous printing of money in order to compensate for that. Um, and kind of back onto your point about how you shouldn't kind of piggybacking off of what Andrew was saying about that's your choice and everything. Um, that's something that you as a person need to take into account. When I left the army, right? I was we had just enough money to move back. Just enough. That's exactly how much we saved, and we didn't even technically save that. That was because the army was gracious enough to give me an advance in my move. Um, so those kinds of things, and I really wanted out of the army for my own reasons, and that was something that I had to take personally into account of. I think a lot of what some of the problems that we as Americans continue to face is it's easier to point at a system like not setting a gap or a cap for overtime. Because when I was a teenager, I was working 127 hours every
Yeah.
2 weeks. I was getting crazy amounts of overtime. But I was accountable for that. That was my own personal choice. And then when I saw what I was kind of doing to myself, I decided maybe that's not worth it. I made the decision to leave Les Schwab kind of in a transition period for me and my wife, kind of getting more stable as we move back. That's it's something that you as an individual you need to take account of.
Okay,
Trying to hold these other systems to that level and I'm not saying that you're specifically blaming the McDonald's for having you work that long or anything like that, but that's something that you as a person need to take account of, and then kind of base that off of that.
okay, let me intervene here real quick, Robbie. Because I'm gonna bring up something. You when you moved, obviously, like you said, you were struggling. You were struggling big time. But you had a support system. Like, because I told you when you moved, I was like, if you can't find a place, you can live here rent free, or until you get on your feet and you can find something else. You had your wife's mom's place, which is what you ended up deciding on, was that her second home basically. You were
Right.
going to stay there and pay rent, but you had these options when you were going to leave. It was like, okay, I have
And
a fallback system. Some people don't have that, and I'm not saying that the system should be changed in that way to support those that don't have it or anything like that. What I am saying is I support Jerome on that cap of no company should be paying you a low enough wage where there's no way to live, and be like, well, you can make it up in overtime, and basically be like, the only way I'm going to pay you a livable wage is through your overtime.
right,
You
but there's
should
some
be
jobs that shouldn't be kind of that
well,
shouldn't be the basis
and
for.
those jobs that you're thinking of, like being a fry cook at McDonald's and stuff. Those aren't careers. Those aren't jobs. Those are inter-level jobs that are meant for high schoolers, not
Right.
people that are 18 and going to live out on their own.
And I wanna
Those
I
Look,
wanna I wanna add on to that because so I think the way I was trying to explain, I was kind of rambling, and I feel like I got off the point of what I was trying to make with the police unions and public servants.
yeah,
Um, I'm not saying that I was trying to give like a personal experience of me working an absurd amount of hours every week,
yeah,
and what it did to me. Imagine that was just me being a contractor for a broadband cable company. Okay, we're talking about police officers doing this. We're talking about EMTs doing this. We're talking
people that
about
deal with public.
nurses, doctors, all these people doing this, and they have a much more stressful job than what I had. I mean, they have people's lives on the line,
Right, and
when they go to a call, and I don't think that those people should be required to work 80 hours a week to be
Yeah,
able to pay their bills for where they're living. It's absurd that you can't live in the city that you're a police officer in because you don't get paid enough. And that's a common problem.
yeah, but that's not a federal issue. That's a local issue. All
right,
these
Right.
precincts are paid by local government, so that's something you need to take to your city council. And that's definitely a conversation we can have. Is what is the value of someone's labor, right? And that's the
yeah,
whole point. Is that we live in a society where that's a question that we can ask. See, the ultimate point here, right, is that we're not living in Venezuela, because in Venezuela they will hold a gun to your head and tell you you have to work 85 hours a week,
yeah.
right? we live in a country where if you're working 85 hours a week, that's your personal choice.
And that was
And
kind of
again, you've got, like you said, you've got bills and stuff, and so there's other factors that are influencing your choice. And you may feel like you have a gun to your head, but the point is that nobody's going to shoot you.
Yeah, you're
Right.
not
And
gonna die if
so
you.
so on that topic, I'm not saying, okay, well, hey, Fred over here is terrible with his money and he has $30,000 in credit card debt, so he has to work these 80 hours to pay it off. I'm talking this city has a median cost of living of, let's say, $3,000 a month. You should make that and like 10% more as a public servant in that city, as a police officer or as a paramedic. You should be able to live comfortably in that city without struggling. And then if you want to make extra money, to pay all these other extra things that you have to pay for, like credit cards, a car note or whatever, then you should have the ability to work that overtime. But I think the base pay in itself should be a livable wage for where you're working as a public servant. And again,
right.
like you said,
Absolutely. And that's,
Absolutely.
again, my point is that we're having this conversation about a national level, but you're bringing up a local issue. And
Yeah.
Right,
so
and
that's my
that's
whole point here, is that we should be having this conversation at the local level, and it should not be public unions having this conversation with politicians who they don't care about the money. So,
Yeah.
like, that's my whole point here, is that it's not really a national question. And you're absolutely right. We need to determine what is the value of the labor, and I absolutely agree with you that a lot of these situations, they deserve to be paid more.
right,
and kind of going off of what Andrew was saying about it being at a local level, um, and how you kind of want it to be more regulated. That's definitely something that we don't tend to do either here in like Prineville and in other places. I could ask you. You live in Madras with Zach, right?
I live
No,
in
no.
Redmond.
Okay. Who's the mayor of your town?
I don't know, dude.
Exactly. Who's the representative for your county?
Yeah, I don't
No.
know.
Right, and that's the problem. We spend so much time thinking at a national level because that's what's popular and that's what everyone talks about. I can't tell you who Crook County's representative is because I don't know.
Right.
I
Yeah.
used to be able to tell you who the mayor was, but that was only because my mother was close friends with him. And I don't know if he's still in or not. So that's the problem. We're not having the conversation with the right people. We're screaming for the government to fix it, but we're screaming at the federal instead of a state level.
Yeah.
That ties directly back into the Californians moving to Texas and ruining Texas.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
totally.
It's because, again, all of these see, that's the problem, is people don't understand how our government system is set up, and so you just immediately start screaming at the top. And so, Robbie, being in the military, you understand chain of command, right?
Yeah,
You don't go yell at the colonel because your sergeant's being a dick.
right. You
You're
just go
not going to
one
go
step
yell at the base
above.
commander.
Yeah,
you know and that's what
it's
we're doing, is people are screaming at the president to solve these problems, but they're local problems.
Yeah.
And that's really represented in COVID, because that's what he did, is he turned over the authority on all these issues to the governors. And yet CNN is painting him as the, like, literally the we should literally, on CNN they said we should be holding him responsible for the deaths of 200,000, which is like the most disingenuous claim.
That's total
And
BS.
yeah, I was like, and even at 200,000, guess what? That's low on the spectrum of what the professionals said would happen.
That's
But
less
it
than
doesn't even matter, because
1%.
it's not his responsibility. It was the jobs of the governors. And so
Yeah.
you have to look at the local governors, but we're not doing that because people don't understand how the system works. And
Yeah.
that's
Well,
really what it all comes down to.
here in Oregon, I mean, with Kate Brown, who's the governor of Oregon, we know what she's doing. A lot of the people that are just normal common people in Oregon understand who the governor is and what she's doing because we hear about it a lot. Um, with what
Yeah.
happened in Portland and
right,
what
but
is
And our
what is
rural
going on.
areas have tried to turn it over from her. We've tried
Yeah,
to take power from her because of her abuse of it.
I mean,
And
she just put another 2 week lockdown on us throughout
yeah,
Thanksgiving into December, from November 18th through December 2nd. She's shutting down all businesses again, and for what? We're
and
wearing the masks. Everybody's wearing the masks. You're required to wear them wherever you go, and COVID is still spreading, and it's not an issue of. I don't think it's an issue of us wearing the mask or these anti-maskers are the problem, because it's not a thing, because you can't go into a place of business without a mask.
Well, so
I
let's
think
try to tie this back into the original topic, right? Because we were talking about sort of the histories of the party and then Abe Lincoln as a third party
Right.
representative, right? And so to tie this back into it, right? When you look at the Constitution, how it was originally created, there was a specific class of people who were allowed to vote,
Yeah.
right? So this was your wealthy landowning whites, and so the reason that they set it up that way is because their whole goal was to have an educated population um, be in charge of making the decisions. But and so what happened was is in the start of the Democratic Party was they were trying to represent the agrarian society. So all the farmers, all the people who were dispossessed that didn't actually feel like they had a voice, and they had a really valid point there. Is we set up this system because Hamilton was trying to set up a system that looks a lot like Great Britain's, where you did only have a specific class of people that were in charge of making all the decisions. And then,
Yeah.
Jefferson said, no, we need to have everybody represented like with the French Revolution. And so, then you had this, that was sort of the first divide was, okay, do we give everybody the ability to vote? What are the limitations on that?
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what we're seeing today is that it comes down to, well, do we have an educated population that's making these decisions?
Yeah, I guess that's a really good point, because I don't think we do. I think
And
I,
that kind
I
I
think
think
And
we
that's
have.
why we had the Electoral College.
yeah,
I think it's more of we don't have an educated in the government. Like everyone's educated when it comes to math, science, history and writing, but no one's educated in how the government actually runs. Like we,
well,
we
and
learn very basic.
it's strange
Well,
too,
how many
because
people knew how to balance a checkbook coming out of high school?
None. None.
yeah,
well,
Absolutely
Exactly.
a very,
none.
well,
a
see,
very
but
small
here's the thing
percentage.
though. Here's the thing though, is that you don't balance checkbooks anymore because everything's online. It's all done
Yeah, good
automatically.
point. Good point.
So we
Yeah,
But
don't.
That is true.
To
That
be
is
fair,
true.
that's an obsolete skill to have. But it is interesting to think that
I didn't mean it
I grew up
literally.
in the
That
big
was
city. I grew up in the big city, and I didn't learn pretty much anything about politics. I didn't learn anything about finances. I took like one half semester class or like one trimester class on both of those things, and then that was enough for my credentials to graduate.
yeah,
Right,
Um,
and I was actually going to kind of tie into that a little bit. We talk about how you know we're educated enough to we're educated, but we're not educated in the same sense that I think Thomas Jefferson was kind of pushing for. We're educated more towards we can now fill a job. We're not
right,
educated
well,
in
that was always the point of the education system, was to create
right,
workers.
right, but
yeah,
we're as we've developed the education system and kind of the things that some of the requirements that they now have, like you need to take a little bit of art, you need to learn a little bit about government. um, I think we breeze over a lot of topics that they should be talking about in the schools, like how a government works. When you took a government class, they probably told you the history of how the government was formed, what we based it off of, which was the Roman Republic and early Athens democracy. And then they kind
mhm,
of went, oh, this is kind of how this is the branch that handles laws. This is the branch that handles legislation. Everyone knows the executive branch, you know.
yeah,
exactly.
But they don't talk about, well, if you have a problem like you were talking about with the unions, these public unions making it difficult for these public servants to live off a livable wage, who do you go to? They don't talk about that.
yeah. They
Right.
don't talk about the chain
Did,
of
did
command.
everybody did everybody see the little cartoon about the bill on Capitol Hill?
Yeah,
Yes, of course,
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
of
but
course.
how many cartoons did you see about your local government?
Literally zero.
none.
Yeah, man. We
Everybody has an opinion on the national government, but nobody knows what's going on in their local government.
Yeah,
right.
because it's not taught. It's not taught. It's not even touched on.
Right, and
Nope.
that's my point. Is we want to sit there and talk about how some of these things need to change, but we're not talking about kind of some of the sources that will encourage change.
Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
enigma. Well,
And that's my point. That's where I'm coming from. Is the actual sources of the problems? Because again, we like to talk on this national level, but it really all starts local. I mean, how many people know what a city council is? You know,
or
Hey,
even if the city
me.
has a council.
exactly.
Yeah, and it's interesting, for me coming from a big city, moving to more rural areas. Um, is the education system in the city is severely subpar. I mean, why in elementary school did we spend 3 years square dancing? Why was that a huge part of my education
Oh
system?
my God.
That
I'm
makes no
I,
sense to me.
I'm
you
sorry.
spent 3 years.
You
We
spent
did like a week.
Yeah, man. No, there was like for we didn't spend like the whole year, but 3 years in a row, we like took a large chunk of time out of our schooling and learned to square dance.
Oh
which
my
is which
God,
is
dude.
which is interesting because if like you ask your parents what some of the things that they learned is, um, and and I don't know exactly your guys' parental background, but my dad an extreme liberal Democrat for the longest time, and now he's become more of a moderate. And my mother was staunch Republican. And the first thing they always talked about was when I was in third grade was like, "Oh, what'd you learn today?" And I'd be like, "Oh, we did multiplication, we drew pictures," and they're like, "Oh, well, did you learn?" Like they were learning things like um, important papers that form kind of the national government, like what's our Second Amendment, things like that. And maybe not at that level, but that was they were kind of taught slightly more about how the world worked, and then we went and switched what we teach to you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Dude, on the
it's
Second
interesting to
Amendment,
look at.
oh, the amount of people that don't know what a semi-automatic or what semi-automatic means
Yeah.
kills me.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I think for like the gun control being such a big thing right now is because people are uneducated on how it actually works. I feel like when you don't understand something, you fear it. You know?
Yeah, fear mongering is a huge part of politics and what passes these laws, and it's crazy to me. But it's also really interesting, like you were saying, Robbie, about how your parents' education system was vastly different from ours. Is why is it that we are straying away from teaching kids politics? Why are we straying away from teaching them STEM subjects?
I actually
Like,
Control.
have a great
Control.
answer to this.
what's that?
Um, it's the transition from the narrative that schools are now getting to be now allowing themselves to push. Before, you know, the culture was very much in a conservative manner. Uh, if you look back when your parents and my parents and even your grandparents were in school, a lot of the values and things they were teaching in school were conservative by nature. You stood and said the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, and that was kind of a and and as time progressed, we started stripping some of those things away because the narrative started to switch, the culture started to change, especially after uh, around the 80s and 90s when people were kind of done with all the different types of conflicts that were either had happened or were getting ready to start, like Desert Storm and things like that. They switched the narrative, and that's when you started getting more of this. I
So
won't
what
say
it's
it's,
called is neo-Marxism, by the way. No,
Yeah.
literally, it's neo-Marxism and the
That is.
rise of critical
Yeah.
race theory. I actually just watched a really good video that I'm gonna share with you guys. That I watched last night on critical race theory and how it's affecting the education system. And I mean, it's crazy. Like they're literally forcing teachers into this sort of mindset where we've moved away from 2 plus 2 equals 4 to 2 plus 2 equals whatever you want it to because you're societally disadvantaged at being able to do math, and it's like, whoa, that's not
Yeah,
how
right,
math works.
and I think that's that's exactly why we've kind of stepped away from some of that, and we're not teaching the things that we used to teach. Is
Yeah.
exactly
No,
that.
because they're racist. It's racist to teach it that way because that's a white mentality. I mean,
Right.
that's literally
yeah. No,
how it all
have you?
comes out.
So have you guys had the misfortune of reading White Fragility?
I have actively avoided reading it. I have read some of the cliff notes, and I found it laughable.
Yeah, so
I've
I
watched
I
many
like
analysis on
I
it.
I like to listen or read to like audiobooks or actual books like opposing things. And I was actually recommended white fragility by someone on a Facebook post because it was this woman of color, right? She posted this thing on Facebook about how this old white dude from Texas is racist because he was roasting her, right? It was hilarious. I was laughing so hard. There was nothing racial about it, but just because he offended her, after she was attacking him, he is racist because he's white and she's black. And I said, everyone was like, "Oh my God, you're so brave for posting this screenshot of this dude being an ass to you," and they were calling him racist, and they were like posting information about his business and what he's tied to, like professionally, and trying to
Oh,
ruin his career, um, and all because he just roasted her because she said something stupid.
and
And now they're trying to ruin his life. And I said, well, what's racist about this? And she said, well, how is it not racist? Because he was making fun of like the size of her forehead and how you can park two garages in her or two cars in her nose because it's so big. I mean, it was hilarious. It was
Oh, that's
I,
hilarious.
fucking great.
and
And,
it's
and,
interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
and so I just want to finish this. And so, and I got attacked by, and this was a post in my old city's community forum on Facebook that I used to live in California. And I got attacked by everybody. They're like, "Oh, you're racist. Like you're just a white supremacist. You don't know what it is to be racially profiled or to have someone be racist towards you." And I was like, "I grew up where you guys are. I am Mexican. Okay, I am a
Yeah.
person of color technically. I have been to Harlan, Kentucky, which is the most racist city in all of the United States. Okay, I have been 100% like attacked by people who are white because I'm brown. Um, and they were telling me to read White Fragility, and so I looked it up. I did not listen to the whole book because it was insane. The premise of it is that if you're white, you're racist, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
And
baseline of that whole book, and people praise it as this glorious book that shows how that talks about how white people are the worst and everybody else needs to rise up against them. It,
oh,
it's insanity.
Wait, so are we
Yeah.
sharing the first time we were called a white supremacist? Because as a person of color, that's literally almost an identical situation. I kind of wanted to chime in on that because I
Huh?
found that really funny. I was having a policy discussion with a gentleman on Facebook about the police issues, and literally this black girl comes in out of nowhere and insults me, and then calls me a white supremacist, and I'm like, see, but I'm not white, right? And then you know what she said to me? She said, "You just internalized your white supremacy.
Dude, yeah,
You're internalized
and,
whiteness." I'm like,
and
You're
I
not
can
even
believe it.
white.
I
and
can
and
believe
that's
it.
and
There's no
that's
excuse. You can't get away from it.
no, and that's the whole premise of that book, White Fragility. That those people like that, okay, who
if
claim this, that you're white or you're internalizing your white supremacy, is that where even if you don't think you're racist, since you're white, you are inherently racist no matter what you do.
No, even if you're not white, you're a white supremacist
Yeah,
because you've internalized it.
yeah, and
It's
if you support anything that's against the far left's viewpoints, then you are a part of the problem. You're supporting white people and their tyrannical like conquering of every other color of race, and that they're the top, and every white person's a white supremacist. Like I said, I lived in Kentucky, right? There's a lot of southern old mindset people out there, and even when I was in Harlan, Texas, when I was being discriminated against, I mean, I was sitting at a bar with my boss because we were working there, and he was buying me food. And this dude across the bar, we were listening to like some country music. I was like, whatever. Paid no mind to anybody except for my boss because my boss told me keep to yourself because he knows what it's like. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And this guy's over here talking to me. He's like, hey boy, you wanna put on some gangster rap? You like that 50 Cent? Do you like Tupac and Biggie? And I'm like, yeah, dude, why not? Let's do it. And he's like, oh yeah, you about that gangster life? And I'm like, dude, totally, yeah, that's me. But
Did you tell him wrong color?
Yeah.
they don't understand that.
If you
But
want to put on some
Yeah.
reggaeton, we can talk, but
dude, exactly. But it's interesting too because my actual job
some
site where I was
dengue.
working, that I was talking to people who were Cajun, right? And I don't know if you guys know what type of person like I don't even know what you call them, like Cajuns are. They're from the Bayou
I
of
think that's right.
Louisiana, and so what they are
I
is
thought it
their
was
dialect is a very
Creole.
Creole. The Creole, that's right. But they speak Cajun, and so their like dialect is a really thick Southern accent with French. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever heard in my life. Could not understand a word they were saying, so I had to have my boss translate for me. And these dudes were super racist. Okay, and then I had conversations with them, and I talked to them like a normal person because the issue is that people like that, they just aren't educated enough, and they're not around diverse communities, and there's just inherently put into their brain as a child growing up in this environment, that these people are bad because they were told they're bad,
Yeah.
and you just hate them inherently for no reason.
Right into
So
Well, Andrew, Jerome, I just want to apologize because apparently, if I'm nice to you, I have made you a white supremacist. So
that's right, dude.
I'm sorry. I'm
You
sorry.
gotta you can't talk
I have
anymore,
to
man.
apologize
I
to you.
know.
Um,
You
and
can wash my feet later. I'll hold you to that.
um,
No.
and to kind of piggyback off that, and kind of the first time, I'm a man. I'm white. You know, I came from a white family, but I have a half black sister.
uh,
Um, and the first time I'd ever been called a white supremacist was specifically because of an argument me and my sister got into about the Civil War. Because the misconception with a lot of people is the Civil War was fought over slavery, and
right,
originally it wasn't. It was because states were, they were feeling like they weren't there wasn't enough balance. One northern state would become a free state, one state would become a slave state, and they were feeling like um, it became I think it was like a federal versus a state kind of problem. And
Well, there
then
was a policy in place where they were going to let future states vote on whether or not they wanted to be slave states,
Yeah,
and that
that's what it
was
was.
sort of the issue.
Yeah, because the balance was about
It's
to be
because
upset.
because they were all going to vote to not be slave states,
Yeah.
yeah,
right,
right,
and the slave states didn't like that.
right,
but it was a policy issue. And then my sister's like, well, because you think that you're a white supremacist. It was only because they didn't want to free slaves. It
no, that was, I mean,
That's what it
it,
became at the end because he
it's
got pressured into it.
yeah, it's hard because you can argue either side, really, um, because it is a policy issue. But when you look at it black and white, I don't mean people, I just mean, the phrase, um, the South wanted slaves, the North didn't want slaves, and although it was a fight over a policy issue of future states being able to vote whether or not they are a slave state or they're not a slave state, um, that pretty much the baseline of it was that whether or not you could be a slave state or a free state.
Yeah.
Well, you got to be careful there because there was three distinct parties, right? There was pro-slavery, which is obviously people that wanted more slavery
Uh,
everywhere. There was the anti-slavery, which meant they wanted to stop the spread of slavery, and then there was the abolitionists who wanted to abolish slavery as a like at all. So the
Yeah.
anti-slavery people weren't trying to take away slaves from the South, and those were who were in charge of the Republican Party. They just sort of absorbed the abolitionists, and so the fear with Lincoln was that he was an abolitionist, and that's
right,
why he got so much resentment from the southern states. And
Yeah.
I mean, literally, people were trying to assassinate him at the beginning of his candidacy, right? Like he
It
wasn't even
just took
president yet.
4 years.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, that was the whole fear, is because you have to recognize that there was the distinct difference between abolitionists and anti-slavery.
Yeah.
right. That
Um,
is true.
And like right now, it's I'm gonna bring this one up. It's gun control, anti-gun control, and
Gun
one's just
regulation.
completely gun regulation, and then
well, no, that's what gun control is,
yeah,
right?
but it's like
And then there's gun abolishment
yeah,
Right. Yeah.
there's the abolishment of guns. There's the you can have some guns, and then there's you can have any gun.
regulation.
Yeah,
Yeah, which
So
is how it
um
technically should be.
yeah,
to,
we're starting to see a repeat right now. Is what I'm saying on that in that sense of like the conflict between states and people right now at an all-time high, and something's about to give basically.
right. So to tie into what I was talking about, at the beginning of this conversation with reforming the Constitution, right? I don't think we should like completely change it. I think that we should take like the Second Amendment, right, and make it more specific because the issue right now is that it's too broad of a statement
Right, but
to
Well, it was supposed to
where
be
like
that way.
It's open
yeah,
to
right. So
interpretation.
here's the problem: is that people find loopholes. Okay, so with the Second Amendment, you have the right to bear arms, but technically, in California, bearing arms could be a potato launcher, right? Because it is a projectile. It is a projectile weapon. It is considered arms in California,
Yeah.
and so they can regulate everything else out of you being able to purchase an AR, of you being able to purchase a shotgun, a pistol, or whatever have you. But they're technically still following the Constitution, and I think that's a problem. I think we should be more specific to where, as a citizen of the United States, you should be able to own and bear rifles, shotguns, and pistols. It shouldn't be so broad to where that these states can get around the Constitution and pretty much take your rights away anyways, and it's illegal.
Yeah.
So I think that the regulation at all is unconstitutional. I mean, like I said, I'm gonna be straightforward on this. I'm a constitutionalist. If you read it straight, there shouldn't be any regulation whatsoever, right?
There
Personally,
should
I
be.
believe if you can afford it, you should be allowed to own a tank. I mean,
Damn
No,
right.
that's
no,
literally what it
I
is.
think I see. I am 100%
And
against that.
I understand that, and that's we're both libertarian, but we've got opposing views here, and so I'm going to explain why I think you should be allowed to own a tank if you can own a tank, right? Because the whole point of the Second Amendment was originally to form a well-regulated militia in order to stand against an oppressive government, right? So I think any kind of regulation on what kind of guns or anything that anybody owns is a direct violation of the Second Amendment. If you want to change the amendment, we have a process for that, but I think currently any of the regulations are actually unconstitutional. And that's
And
just on a pure technicality basis. It's not necessarily, I think, morally that anybody needs a tank. It's just, as it was written and under the intentions that it was written, you should be able to own anything,
yeah.
quite frankly. And that's why we have a military, is, is to keep those people in check. It's like, yeah, you own a tank, but the government owns a predator drone. So,
Right.
have
Yeah.
fun with that.
I totally get that, and I get where you're coming from. My only issue is that, again, like I said before, is that we're 350 million people. Okay, people have different beliefs, different mindsets, different thoughts. So again, with what we were talking about before, with white supremacy and racism and hatred between these two groups, especially now with the amount of turmoil in these subcategories of people that we are pushed into with politics and society right now, is what happens if Antifa gets a tank and they start shooting up city council buildings, and they go and attack right wing houses, and it becomes this all out civil war. And I feel like we
That's
should
what
be
my
able.
RPG's for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Because
I feel like
the whole point is that if they own a tank, that means that the Proud Boys or whoever can also own a tank, and it comes down to this theory of a armed society. Have you guys heard of this?
yeah, no, and an armed society is a safe society, but
Yeah.
and I believe that for sure. But I just think giving these radical groups the ability to own these weapons of destruction, it shouldn't be allowed, because there's so much unnecessary bloodshed that would come from it because
I
of
don't
Well,
think the
their
risk.
beliefs.
I don't think the risk of that bloodshed, because that's what it is. Right?
I
I don't
think
think
I
the
think
risk of
they
that
I think
bloodshed.
they'll. Oh, sorry, you were talking, but you cut
You
out.
cut out,
I,
yeah,
I was gonna
Oh, I'm
say.
sorry. Can you
I
hear
was
me
gonna.
now?
yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I was going to say that I don't think the risk of that bloodshed, because it is a risk, it's hypothetical. I don't think the risk of that bloodshed is worthy of taking away, you know, the rights that we have been guaranteed.
Yeah,
Because
and I
that's what it is. You're doing cost benefit analysis, risk assessment, and
Right.
I just don't
they
think the risk
they'll.
outweighs the benefits.
But again,
The,
the problem that I was referring to, sorry, Zach, and I keep getting cut off.
you're okay.
But
You're okay.
the problem that I was referring to again was that, yes, we do have the right to bear arms, but like you see, even though you may consider it unconstitutional, technically in legal terms, it is not unconstitutional for California to be doing what it's doing right now with regulating the amount of bullets you can have in a clip, what kind of guns you can own, because you still are able to bear arms. It's not all arms, but it's still arms.
right,
And
but
that's why.
Andrews,
Uh-huh.
sorry, I was going to say, but the point of the Constitution and the reason why it was written that way and the reason why we shouldn't change it was because now the state's regulating those the amount you can have, what type of ammo you can have, how large your clip can be, and now they're limiting your ability to bear arms. It's not necessarily that you don't have the right still. It is now more limited, and because it's more limited, it now makes it so if the government decides to become more tyrannical, and we start dealing with more tyrannical policies and things like that, and we decide to rise up and fight against it, like our founding fathers want us to do. We're now at like we're already at a disadvantage because
But
they
now
have
we're at a bigger
military.
disadvantage.
Now we're
I
at a
mean,
bigger disadvantage.
controversial opinion here, right? The Civil War was completely legal. I mean, the South had a right to secede from the Union, but the Union
Yep.
also had a right to try to stop them from seceding.
Oh, 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
that's the whole point we're expressing, is that they wouldn't have been able to even try if they didn't have, the ability to purchase and bear weapons the way that they did, which, you might argue, hey, that's a good thing. But again, it's like, well, they misused it. They didn't have, necessarily what we consider the right morals nowadays. But it's like, do we want to take away that chance and risk again falling into tyranny?
well, think of it this way: if they had won, guess what? Our morals would have aligned with theirs by the time we got
Exactly.
around to this generation. So it's more of the winning side is going to be seen as the right side
Well,
versus
that's history throughout. That's
yeah,
throughout
Yeah, that's
history.
how it's
yeah.
always been.
That's how it's always been. So that's
So
why I'm saying. Yeah, obviously, it looks wrong, but at that time, in their eyesight, they were on the right side.
I mean, but like again, like what I'm saying is that you are saying that they're limiting the right to bear arms, but it doesn't say you can't do that in the Constitution. That's why I'm saying we need to reform that amendment. Is that maybe we say, okay, you have the right to bear arms without limitation. I I feel like it just needs that little extra something to where states like California can't do this, to where pretty much now they have an unarmed society,
Yeah,
and we could easily, I mean, they're the Western Seaboard. They could easily be invaded by a foreign country, um, and they would just be decimated because they have no defense.
yeah. Their defense would be the states around them,
Their
but
defense would be
California's lost.
the federal military that's stationed there,
Yeah,
and then, but I mean, once they get on land itself, they're just fish in a barrel, and they don't
yeah,
take that into account because we've been in such a comfortable society for so long to where we're not worried about war on a domestic territory. It's all overseas. We don't have to worry about it. We don't see it. We don't think about it. But there's still a possibility that this could happen at any point, especially with tensions being so high right now
yeah,
with the political issues that are going on.
yeah.
I mean, on the other hand, right, again, adhering to the Constitution,
You cut out
says
again.
that the states. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Okay, so like I was saying, adhering to the Constitution, again, I've got to go on the defensive
you cut out
You
again.
cut out. You cut out again.
for. Hello.
You're like
There
you're
you
like
go.
a
Okay,
pendulum, dude.
something I don't necessarily support, but it is the right of the states to make their individual decisions on these matters. It's just whether or not they have the right to infringe on, federal rights. And
Yeah,
And,
so
they shouldn't, because that was the whole point
that's
of
the
the federal
balance.
government.
Yeah.
The federal government was the basis of our rights as American citizens, and then from there, the state has the ability to decide on other regulations like drug policies, like state like taxes, and all sorts of things like that, and their businesses underneath that state. But what we have with the Constitution on the federal government side, that is the baseline for every state, and every state should have to follow that. But again, the issue is the loopholes, because this is America and we have lawyers, and lawyers are douchebags, and they find loopholes in everything. And this is exactly what's happening with with the even with freedom of speech, and like we were talking about with social media. Why, when we have a constitutional right of freedom of speech, that these companies are able to silence people and deplatform them? Well, it's because it also contradicts the free enterprise, where this is a private company and they have the right to do whatever they want with their company. But they also have a massive influence over the world, not even the United States, but the entire world. They have the ability to reach billions of people and sway their mindset, and that nobody's ever had that kind of power before, and nobody is doing anything to stop it.
yeah,
Well, I mean, the point there is that, it's not just Twitter, though. I mean,
No,
you
I
have
know it's
Twitter,
not
you
just
have
Twitter; it's
Facebook, you
oh,
everything.
yeah,
have
Oh, it's
Well, no.
everything.
My point. Sorry. I think you misunderstand. My point is that you're not limited to a single source, and that's how capitalism works, right? You have access to Twitter, you have access to Facebook, you have access to the entire internet, so you could theoretically ignore Twitter for the rest of your life and be completely fine. And that's the whole point and why they shouldn't be necessarily regulated is because theoretically you have other places to go. That's like the fundamental way that capitalism works. The problem is when the government does get involved, actually it ironically creates these issues by getting involved.
So I totally see what you're saying. The issue is that it's now beyond the United States. It's
Yeah,
the world. And the other problem too is that
Well,
yeah,
they're regulated
it
in
is
other countries.
they are,
China
yeah.
regulates what you can
Taiwan,
see on
yeah,
Twitter.
China regulates what you can see on anything. First
yeah,
of all,
yeah,
True.
Taiwan has done a really good job of what they're doing to battle social media and the issues that they're causing in politics. And they have a really good policy to combat it, where they have people with opposing views. Where you will actually on your timeline you will see opposing views, and it'll cause you to debate. It'll cause you to open your mind to these other possibilities, to where you're not so close minded and you hate everybody that isn't you. And that's awesome. And I think we need to do that here. But the issue is that you do have all these other companies, right? Like I've never been on Twitter personally. I think it's stupid.
yeah.
Um,
Same here.
but they still, whether or not you can choose between Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, whatever, they still have billions of people using that platform, and
And
so
the,
that's a problem, and that
yeah,
needs to
that because
be
they can change election results with that. They have the power. Like Google, Twitter, and Facebook have all been confronted about that power, and they deny it. But the results show that they can change the outcome of elections with their information
well
that they give out.
so
Well,
they
that's the
can.
whole point.
They can, but
I think
a big misconception is that everybody thinks it is specifically Facebook that is doing it, or it is specifically Twitter that is doing it, like the
No,
heads
it's
of
all
that
of them.
company
Yeah,
are
yeah,
doing it intentionally. No, the issue is the way that they have their system set up. Is they will give ad space to the highest bidder, and
yeah,
so if someone else, let's say the Democrats, want to put all their ads on Facebook and they're the highest bidder, all you're going to see are these Democratic ads, and that's it. Or all you're
Right,
going to
but
see are these
that's
Republican ads, and that
well,
that's
Well,
hold on. That's not
g- g-
necessarily true.
I was gonna say Google was accused of hiding results on their
Yes.
search engine when you were trying to search up information on parties. That they would actually bury the results on some of them.
right.
Well, and that happens with Facebook and with right wing sites like the Daily Wire on Facebook, is that they will downgrade them in the algorithm for everyone, even the people who would normally, have them as a part of their algorithm. So again, I think I see what you're saying, but I'm thinking that the problem here is the ability to regulate at all, right? And I see what you're saying with the algorithm, but I'd say it's more when they take their own approach to it, like Facebook with their fact checkers, right? Because they don't fact check themselves. They
Right.
allow an outside fact checking source. And so I said we do away with the whole concept of fact checking, right? And that opens the risk to misinformation being spread, but it also opens up the opportunity for you to see everything that's out there and make
Yeah,
up your own mind based off of everything that you see. So I think these regulations at all that they're able to do by, downgrading certain topics or literally silencing the president of the United States by labeling it as fake news. Right? It's like I
Right.
don't think they should be able to do that. That's where I have issue with Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, all of that.
well, I can bring up a good example of like that system and how that they basically abuse it is with like Joe Biden and the tapes with Hunter and everything like that. Any of that information that was given out was immediately taken down.
our
And the reasoning behind it is that it was not a sourced uh,
It's
system
a
of
hack
information.
materials policy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Oh,
was
and
it was,
even that with
but
the
then I'll
hydroxychloroquine.
bring up the counterpoint of that. Donald Trump's tax information was posted. Guess what didn't get taken down? That was hacked. That was not legal information that he just handed out for you guys to look at. It was information that was released to the public without consent of his and was, hacked or, gotten by other means. And they did not mute that. They did not block it. They just allowed it to go out there. And you tell me how that is not a, two-faced way of doing it.
Again, that's why this is already in motion, right? We're talking about something that's already in motion.
Yeah, yeah,
The taking away their ability to regulate content that's on their sites,
yeah,
or otherwise listing themselves as media sources, which then puts them under government regulation in other ways.
yeah,
This is something, again, it's already in motion, because people have already recognized. I mean, they shot themselves in the foot by
yeah,
all of this that's happened recently, because now you've seen it, I've seen it, everybody's seen it, and they've got no choice but to act now.
yeah.
Right.
It's whether something will be done about it.
So we need to stay on that as a people and make
Yeah,
sure that
Right, and that comes
is
we need to make
actually a
sure it's
reality.
done. Yeah, yeah, and that's our duty. That's our duty as citizens.
Um, so now
Well,
that we've kind of
well,
discussed,
I was gonna say, do you mind if I bring up my way of dealing with the electoral college?
yeah, sure, we'll
Since
circle back to the electoral college because I was going to bring up kind of the effect that like Andrew and Jerome are both third party. Andrew more sits in the Republican camp, but
I voted Republican, but if Joe Jorgensen was an actual candidate, I would have voted for her.
right. So I was going to we'll go to your electoral college point, and then we're going to circle into this voting point that I kind of want to discuss a little bit too.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that because I wanted to bring it up earlier, and I let Andrew take off with what he wanted to do with his counterpoint.
Yeah,
Obviously,
sorry about that.
no, it's fine. We just went off into a tangent, and I liked it because obviously got a conversation going. So don't worry about it. So my idea, which I know you all will tear apart equally, and I hope that one of you actually does agree with it, but I really doubt it. Since we're talking about the equal representation between rural areas and cities, is why not break it up into, like, let's say for the senator, so your two votes in the electoral college, instead of it being also based on the popular vote, why not base it off the districts and the amount of districts that vote Democrat versus Republican? So if this one, the majority went Republican, that district becomes red. There's your point towards it, and you have your total amount of districts. Uh, obviously they're already decided up. If the majority of the districts go red, then those two votes will go towards red. And if they vote blue, then those two votes will go towards blue. And then you'll have the rest, which is the House, those electoral college will go towards the popular vote. That way, like with many cases this year in states where the majority geographically, those districts went red, but the cities all went blue and the majority vote went blue, so all the votes went towards the Democrat Party. This way, those rural areas will at least get some type of representation and will get those two electoral votes basically in those states. And it may not be this huge majority that can go towards your candidate, but at least it's something, you know.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's like a good idea in a way. I think that it would sway, like the issue we're having right now is that these big cities have the control of the electoral vote of states, right?
Yeah.
Because of their larger population. I think the problem with that though is that there still are more rural areas than there are large cities, and that it would sway that power the other direction, and then we'd have the same
It,
problem but on the opposite
it,
scale.
you got to realize that would have a max vote of 100 electoral votes then, because 50 states, two per, going towards this party, which is almost one third. It's just slightly
Okay.
over one third of what is needed to win. But you also got to realize most of those ones, like on the East Coast, with like New York City and everything, they went all blue. So you're not guaranteed those 100 votes either. But it gives them that power. But then the majority will still go towards that electoral college. And obviously, I haven't done the math on it. This is very rough. But I'm almost certain that even those cities with that power will still have more power, but they won't have as much.
So I agree with the basis of your proposition. Personally, I try to work within systems that are already here instead of trying to reinvent them, just because that usually works out easier.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that we talk about real quick how exactly the electoral college works. right? So, quick Google search. Each state appoints electors according to its legislature, right? Equal in
Yeah.
number to its congressional delegation.
Yes.
So, and do you guys know how congressional delegation numbers are assigned? Right, it's based off of your population.
Population. Yeah. Yeah.
So all these things that you're talking about are already kind of in the system,
Yeah.
and
That's
and
why.
I
That's why.
understand that. Like I said, I agree with the basis. I don't think they're being completely representative, right?
Yeah.
And I think the problem here is because we keep having situations where, despite, again, so like I brought up Oregon, right? Despite one of the senators being, or sorry, not the senator, one of the congressional delegates being Republican, how did Oregon vote? Where's all its elector
Yeah.
or electoral college um, seats going? They're all going blue, right? So
Yep.
you're not getting that representation that is already there. So, if we made it to where, it was perfectly fine for more states to split their vote, kind of like the two examples that you brought up earlier,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can stay within the system that we already have and still make it more representative. Because again, the way that the districts are set up, you're having representation for these rural areas. It's just not reaching the national level like it should be
Yeah.
Right.
And
because there's
that's
no
why that's
split of electoral votes for some
yeah.
reason.
And that's why I agreed with doing the percentage, but I know that if that is not a way that they will decide and that they're like, oh no, I don't like it that way. This is another alternative where, it's still more equal, but the cities still have more power than they do. But this gives rural areas a little bit more and a little bit more say, giving them some of the power back, at least, if anything.
Well, it all comes up to who's making the districts, right? I
Yeah, yeah.
mean,
Well,
20,
that I actually brought
2022 is the redistricting,
and that's why I brought that
year.
up. That actually, in all reality, is it's no longer going to be just decided by statewise. It is going to have to go through a vote of the people, be okayed by the people, and then it has to be okayed federally as well, because there could be a blatant abuse of power on that when it comes to districting, and cities deciding, hey, we're going to make 30 different districts in our own little town. That way, we can get that power back and get those two votes back to
Well, that's
ourselves.
kind of how it happens, right? Is you've got like a small portion of the city, which population wise, that small portion of the city is worth a ton, but land wise, it's not a lot. And then they
Yeah,
include a ton of rural space with that small section of city so
yeah,
that the small section of city can overwrite the
and
the
that's
voices of the rural people.
and
And
that's why
again,
I
it
think
literally all just comes down to who's making the districts.
yeah, and that's why I said I think it should go through the people, then the state, and then through federal as well, so that they can check it and be like, "Yo, this is abuse. It has to be okayed by everyone, not just one or just that one state deciding, hey, yeah, this is good for my people." Because then all it takes is that state having more democratic power in the House and Senate, whatever, to pass that and be like, "Yeah, you know what? That's good." And
I mean,
then
and so you can see what's how we have the ability within the system that we already have
yeah,
to sort of set things fair. It's just whether or not we can live up to the system as it was originally designed.
yeah,
Because districting like that was never. I don't think that was intentional in the way that the federal government was originally set up. So that's
no.
something I do think was invented later on, um,
And
and then
it was more
utilized.
statewide. I think it was more statewise to get stuff done their way and to kind of break up the state so it's not just one person making all the decisions for those districts, because it's hard to have one person in the state know exactly what's happening all around the state in every city.
Well, that's why
It's
we've got multi-level stages of government,
yeah, yeah,
because you
yeah,
do have one governor, but you have a whole House of Representatives and a whole state Senate. You
yeah.
know,
But rather than have that one person make up all the laws for each one of those districts or for the entire state, they can make a law for that district instead, or like a certain, like, was it the Deschutes County one this year for like
so you're talking about
revamp of
like
the roads?
local city councils.
Just about basically. But instead of them being the ones to make those laws, these districts now create those city councils
Hmm.
and allow them to kind of run those rather than being like, okay, well, now we have to go to her to get it okayed. We can run it ourselves and then have the people vote on it.
So
It's hard to explain.
you're suggesting in kind of a historical counterpoint would be like the plebeian uh, the plebeian system that was in Rome, where they had a tribune of the plebs who kind of like was in charge of helping represent them, but the people themselves are the ones that were kind of voting on it.
Yeah. But I'm not right now. I'm not down to that level. Again, like I said, we didn't get much like teaching of that, and to lower level government, I am not very knowledgeable about. I understand mayors and I understand governors, and that's about it. I don't understand the inner workings of it or anything like that. But uh, that's why I'm more set on the federal for electoral college, is still keeping the integrity of it and keeping basically the exact same filament that we have for it, but kind of altering it slightly to allow rural areas have the more representation.
Okay, I definitely think that's something that I'll have to do a little bit more research in, and maybe we'll come back and discuss it.
Oh,
In
I'm sure we'll get some interaction with it. If we get some interaction with it, we'll definitely talk about
um,
it. I'm hoping someone will
Yeah,
say
you picked really broad topics for these shorter segments.
yeah, well, I apologize. It's one of those things that have rattled around in my brain, and I felt like this was a good topic to talk about it since we're talking about the two-party system.
Yeah,
But
I mean, we have like 2 hours of discussion here.
yeah,
so to now to build up onto kind of the one of the big things that we talked about last video was representation of third parties. We all knew one third party or this election from kind of what I've gotten, but not a lot of
yeah,
people did. Zach, you didn't even find out about the third party until Jerome told you.
yeah. I really didn't know what was going on. I obviously knew there's a third party running, but I didn't know the ideals, nor did I really care too much because it's like, okay, I know this is a kind of a throwaway vote, or at least that's what I've been told. And even then, I still don't believe it as a throwaway vote. But I was like, well, it doesn't matter what I vote if I go Republican or third party because we're a Democrat state, so it's a throwaway vote either way for me.
So let's kind of talk. How what kind of based kind of and well, sorry, going into kind of what Andrew was saying about how it's easier to build off of systems that are already in place. How do we use the system that we currently have for voting and getting names out
Third
there,
party names out.
third party names out there, in order to kind of give them representation?
So I feel like we need to um remove like the ability for these two parties to get this absurd amount of funding for these really long segments of national television or advertising, because those third parties don't have that because they haven't been a part of the government or they haven't been in power in the government for 100 years. So
Yeah.
they don't have that sort of influence. I mean, I was just looking up the presidential debates, right? And the presidential debates are not run by the federal government or any sort of government. They're ran by the Commission on Presidential Debates. And the Commission on Presidential Debates is a nonprofit corporation established in 1987 under the joint sponsorship of the Democratic and Republican political parties.
Oh my
So
God.
there's a massive bias in that, and that's the reason why there haven't been any third party candidates on that debate stage is because nobody realizes this. You see, oh, we're having the presidential debates. That has to be run by the government, right? No, it's a private corporation that
So
is
we should
funded by
change it
these
to
two
government.
parties. So I think a big issue is the fact that this is a possibility that they can corner this market of people who watch the debates on TV or who stream it or whatever. This private company that hosts this has the ability to just silence and ignore all these other candidates. That I mean, if Joe Jorgensen was on the debate stage, I mean, she would have decimated both of them, and she would have gotten so much more publicity from just talking to the other two candidates.
Oh yeah,
And
big time.
she's never
What
been
year
in
did
a
you
room
say
with
that was
hundreds of
again?
them. What's that?
What year did you say it was founded again?
1987.
Okay.
Huh.
So, yeah, I mean, it's crazy that, and this is not commonly known. This is not common knowledge
No,
whatsoever.
no.
Um,
This is my first time hearing about it.
so this is honestly, I think, probably the second biggest problem that has to do with third party misrepresentation, or lack of representation. I mean,
Yeah,
the biggest problem is the fact that, again, like I said, these two parties have this massive amount of funding where they can do stuff like this. They can get all this advertisement. They can get all this
yeah.
media coverage, and I feel like this is one of the things where, again, this is the federal government. We pay taxes towards it. I think we should be able to, as people, vote to where we can regulate this section of the federal government, where we say, hey, how about, instead of you guys doing this independently by funding your campaigns, the taxpayers will pay for an hour of national television time that everybody has access to, where each party can pretty much plead their case, right? Any party that has a valid running in the presidential election, right?
So, I guess I should ask, would you agree with my idea from the last video when I brought it up about that third party representation of where instead of it being run by parties, that the federal, uh, they come in, the federal government comes in and is like, okay, well, if you can qualify for running as a president, you get this amount of funding that we will give you to run ads and to go on to do your rallies and stuff in certain cities, whatever you choose, but you only get this amount of funding. And then we will also allot you these debate times where you will come in and you will all debate each other, whether it's 1v1 and they just do it progressively through nights and do different candidates each night, or if they do it where it's like a group debate. Would you agree with that as being an option?
I feel like yeah, that sounds good to me, because I mean, we already pay an absurd amount in federal taxes, and a lot of it
Yeah.
goes to pretty much just the politicians. I feel like we should take, like, politicians should not be getting paid as much as they get paid to fuck us over, right? I mean, because all they do is just take from the common working person of America.
Oh yeah.
Um,
And
and
Well, all their money comes from the packs and stuff, and like their sweetheart deals and stuff like that.
right,
I do
yeah,
want to
exactly.
specify that it's not
Yeah.
just them taking taxpayer money.
But we do pay a lot of tax. We do pay a lot of taxes, and
we pay a huge amount, and then we
and
also get told that the rich are going to be taxed more, and then they just get out of it with loopholes. So, I mean, it's shit like that that it's like, well, now the only
I
one
mean,
that's
it's just
losing is the
this
working class.
vicious cycle
Yeah,
that we need to kind of interrupt and switch, like kind of
yeah.
reverse it.
Yep.
Because
So,
So
I'm
what's that?
sorry not to interrupt, but one of the things that I noticed that's kind of problematic in your solution, because I agree, your solution does kind of, allow it kind of it's meant to enforce kind of the equal representation. The problem is the key word you said was that the federal government needs to step in to do that, but the federal government is is extremely trenched in this two party system.
Right, and again, that's the problem. So Oregon, this year, on this last election, on our ballot, one of the measures that they passed was the fact that the anybody running for government in the state of Oregon has to disclose the amount of money they're getting from their sources on the outside, and what, like, is attached to that money. Pretty much, like, why did they give you that money? What comes with that money that they're giving you for your campaign, who's giving it to you, and things like that. Because if you have someone who's running for senator or for governor in Oregon, and you look at who's giving them money, and you see that the largest portion of their funding is coming from Monsanto, and they want to deregulate, the food supply and what can go inside your food. That's a conflict of interest, and that's a problem. Um, and the fact that
well,
we don't have that already with on a federal level is also a problem. Like, why don't we know where their money is coming from for these campaigns, and
And why are they
why
getting it?
why they're getting these insane amounts of money from these private companies as our politicians?
so I'm gonna make a real quick defense, at least for Monsanto, which blame me if you must. But yeah, I would argue that is kind of representing interest, which is their job. But I agree with you as a whole. I saw a post a while ago that was pretty funny, and it said, if we made our politicians, wear their campaign donators on their outfits like NASCAR drivers, wear their sponsors, then that would help our political landscape tremendously because we'd know, whose pockets they were in.
Yep.
So I
Yeah,
think that goes along with your idea.
totally. And like you were talking about before when we were discussing public unions and wages and things like that, where it should be negotiated by the person, right? The whole idea of the government or of this, this land of the United States that we live in was that the people were going to decide which companies were successful, which businesses were successful, because we would buy their products and we would use their services, right? And
Yep.
that's an awesome idea. But the problem with this and politicians is we don't know what we're really buying into
Yeah.
because it's so shadowed in these
It's based on
campaigns
a trust
and
system.
right, and
Where,
you don't know who's behind them, you don't know who's funding them, you don't know where they're getting these millions and millions of dollars to do this advertising, to do these rallies, to reach all these people, and it's like I really think that it is a conflict of interest with the people because we're voting on someone based on their policies when they can say one thing when really in the background they're being paid by someone to do something different.
yeah.
So can I go ahead and give my take on Zach's idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So when you said that on the last episode, I mean, I literally like stood up from my chair because I thought you were ripping it straight from my brain. Like it was scary, kind of.
I was about to say, am I about to tell you no, you can't say anything because you're gonna rip it apart? All right.
No, no, no. I
Wait, hold
agree
on. What is this on?
wholeheartedly. This is an idea that I've actually been like thinking about for a really long time. And so when you said that about having, a specific, you know, you don't want an agency for it. It's literally just a law where you apply for funding.
You're cutting out
Oh,
again.
you're cutting out again.
Sorry, you apply for funding based off some sort of wide set criteria, which is pre-established so that you can't game the system.
Yeah.
And then you have access to that funding, and you either, I'd rather people be able to do whatever they want with that. But I could also see the case for saying, okay, no, you get, everybody gets a specific ad on, on this day, whatever, or
Yeah.
everybody could run this billboard or something like that. Um, but definitely like taking away the ability for the politicians to receive money from outside donations, and that even includes individual donations, um, would I think that would make the positive change that we need. And then that also gives the third parties the opportunity, because it gives everybody the opportunity to run on their actual policy
Yeah.
instead of just either running around ballot harvesting and preaching certain things, the
Yeah.
ability to lie and manipulate and
Or using millions of
run
dollars to get
separate
ahead of
agendas.
someone.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Saying, "Hey, well, I've got more money, so I spent more on advertisement, so more people saw it," or "I bought the better ad on social media." You know.
or
Yeah.
or pull a Trump move down in the 2016 election and buy Ted Cruz's website.
Yeah.
He bought the IP, so whenever you typed it in, it would take you to Trump's
That's
campaign website.
fucking great. I forgot about that.
So and an idea I had that kind of improved upon that is you notice that these presidents, they tend to spend time only campaigning in battleground states.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they just assume everyone's going to vote the same everywhere else.
Yeah.
Right. I think there needs to be some form of they need to bounce around to these other states in order for
Well, I
other
mean,
people.
that's how Trump flipped a bunch of states in 2016. So, I mean, you're talking about something that's already happened.
Right,
Yeah.
but it doesn't happen often.
So
I mean, that's
yeah,
pretty recent.
Right. No, I mean like it. Obviously, it's recent, but then you look back at at Obama's, two presidential races, and nothing extremely, none of the real other than swing states, nothing really flipped.
Well, again, it comes down to these information. Who has the sources of information, right? And where are people getting their information? Are people actually informed? And I think this is an issue that'll naturally solve itself over time with the internet, as long
Yeah,
as we let it, sort of formulate on its own, and we don't try to get the government involved the way
I
that it
allow it
has
to be
been.
free. Yeah,
Well, and we don't allow people to silence other people if they claim to be open
yeah,
platforms.
yes.
That's a yeah.
See,
I was just
personally,
Yeah,
I
I
don't
saw.
believe in unbiased people. I don't think they exist. And I think that's more of a conservative viewpoint. Is that we all believe that individuals are flawed.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you're evil or anything or whatever. It just means that everybody is flawed no matter what, which is more of a Christian, I guess, idea. But I'm not really
Well,
religious.
it's like
Um,
circumstances build your views. So everyone's gonna have a view.
Yeah, and yeah, no,
well,
you're totally 100% right. Everybody has their own bias, whether it be good or bad. But no matter whatever situation you get put in, you're gonna have some sort of a bias one way or another.
well, the direction I was taking with this, right, is that we have this concept of an objective, unbiased media, right? Which nowadays we everybody knows that's not true. Right,
Yeah.
we all know nowadays that there's not a thing that exists, but we pretended like it existed for a really long time, and I think that had a really drastic effect on previous elections. And so that's something I'd like to see moving forward is everyone just declares their views, everyone just declares what side they're on, and then we can move forward, with that knowledge. I think anybody pretending to be unbiased is sort of the issue here.
They're
right.
lying.
And I mean, one of the nice things that we did starting this episode out was you guys both stated, hey, our views are more of the libertarian variety. Um, and I agree. If people came out right away and said, hey, this is kind of where we're leaning, it would give people that whole, okay, well, I'm only getting a portion of this, or I'm only getting one side of this, and that would
And
really,
see, that's why I like alternative news sources like, Louder with Crowder, Ben Shapiro, is because, they say up front, hey, we're going to give you the news, but this is a conservative spin on the news, right? If you want a liberal spin on the news, go somewhere else. And so,
right.
that allows me to check their website, and then I can go look at CNN, who, doesn't claim to be, left, but we all know they are. And then I can make the comparison between the two news sites
Yeah. It's like
and
why?
make my own personal decision, which is I think how it should be.
Yeah. I feel like labeling your news site and saying, yeah, this is the site we're supporting is a good way to do it. Kind of like how I said with like the labeling on each one of rightist versus leftist. And it's a good warning label to have, even if you don't want to accept it. It's like that we all know you are, so why not put it there for the people that don't? That way
Well,
they can
there's
come
still
in and be informed.
people. I'm telling you, there's still people nowadays that honestly, truly believe that CNN is completely 100% objective.
Oh yeah, oh
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
oh
I
yeah.
during the whole
Like,
election, I saw people
it drives me crazy.
talking about how CNN is reporting it this way, and it's going to happen this way because they've never lied to them before. And it's like, well, and then I got on there and I was like, well, hey, did you check like one of the news sources I recommended last video was BBC because they're out of country,
Yeah,
so
foreign.
they don't. I mean, obviously they kind of have a dog in this race, but not as much of one. So they're gonna report on.
Australian news is really good, right? Actually,
Which one?
that's my recommendation. Australian news.
That's
Oh yeah.
actually a
Australia
really good
covers the
point.
U.S. election really well.
But the idea was that they were taking this one news source, and then the second you go and say, hey, this news source is wrong, or not necessarily wrong, but hey, this is only one news source, and they're kind of reporting it biasly. I got attacked about that, because there's not that dialogue anymore.
Well, you challenge the ideals as a person. They're like, oh no, 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 I can't be wrong. Yeah, but
Well,
that I
yeah,
mean,
it's hard for someone to realize that too when you say, "Hey, this thing that you've been listening to your entire life and that you 100% believe in is lying to you, or not telling you the entirety of the truth." It's hard for people to like psychologically like come to terms with that fact that they're not right. and that what they've been listening to is only half the story or just false.
Well, it's all confirmation bias and echo chambers,
Right.
man. And the problem is, it's really hard to see your own bias, especially
Yeah.
with confirmation bias. And my whole point previously about the people that don't know that CNN's not objective is that they then form this echo chamber around what they think is the truth because they don't know any different. And then if you try to poke that bubble, I mean, dude, you're in for a world of a hurt when it pops, you know.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and at this point, in my opinion, these so-called quote unquote news outlets are just tabloids. They're just inciting hate. They're just they have that hate bias where let's say you go to something on CNN and it says, "Oh, Trump hates puppies," and then you're like, "Oh well, screw Trump. I love puppies. How could this guy hate puppies?" Blah blah blah, and it gets you to click more. And that's one of the problems with all this garbage on the internet right now is that the thing that runs this country and every other country is money, right? Everybody does everything for the interest of money. And so the problem with these social media outlets and these news outlets is that the only way for them to really make money right now is to get clicks because of the internet, and the only way to get clicks is hate bias.
Yep.
And let's say one news outlet takes away that hate bias, and they want to be, a better, more moral um, source of news, and they want to try to become more unbiased, or show both sides of the story. The issue is that people aren't going to be as interested in that because it doesn't incite hate. It's proven to
Yep.
where you people will look at something about puppies being rescued from a burning building, right? And then they'll see an article about like someone in the Taliban executing 10 Americans. They're going to pay more attention to and come back to that subject of these terrorists beheading people more than they are going to be about this positive story that these puppies being rescued, because
Yeah.
it incites hate, and naturally through human bias, that is what you're drawn to, is hatred more
Yep.
than you
And
are positivity.
I
Which
feel like
again is why I don't think we can. I don't think we can knock them for that.
No, and
I
that's what
just
I'm saying, is that's the
propose that
problem.
they need to be clear on what side their hate bias is leaning to. That's
yeah.
like
I
my
guess
But
that
take
the,
on
I
that.
guess that's definitely one way to fight it. I also think another big problem is a generational issue, right? So we have this older generation that's also on the internet right now that don't realize that this is a problem, and they're not
yeah.
willing to believe it's a problem. I've had conversations with older people, 2, 3 times my age, and they're not willing to believe that this is real. No matter whether you show them facts or not, because they've been watching Fox News their whole life, or they've been watching CNN their whole life, and that's what they live and die by. And the possibility of it being wrong is just not a part of their reality.
Yeah.
And so I think like you were saying, Andrew, before, is that really we need to just let this kind of work itself out, and these older generations to kind of pass on pretty much, and for the newer generation to kind of take over and realize this. But there's also like it's like a microclimate of people who understand this, though. There are also issues with generations younger than us, which, I mean, we're all pretty young, um, that also don't realize this because they grew up on the internet. So it's really only like our generation that grew up in a time right before the internet was super big and while it was blowing up, that realized this, because we weren't born without it entirely, and we weren't born completely in it. So we're in this kind of weird stasis of knowledge of what it was like before and what it was like after. Immediately as it was happening, we were a part
Yeah.
of it. And now the older generation is consumed by the older ways, and the newer generation is consumed by the new ways, and they don't really see an in between of these sources, and like what's factual and what's not, because they believe, again, like the older generation, what they see on the internet is real, and the older generation, what they see on the news is real and it's true, and they can't differentiate between fact and fiction.
I would say it's more of like that they don't believe everything on the internet's real, but I believe that they find one internet thing that they believe is true all the time, just like they did with Fox News, and then they trust that one all the time, whether it's real or not.
Right, yeah, and it's like I said, it's been happening since any sort of form of communication was a thing. There's always been this bias of information. And it just depends on who it comes from. Even and we see it, like I said, with the older generation with news and newspapers, and we see it with the newer generation with the internet and different social media sites and news sources.
Yeah.
I do
Uh,
I do think as long as we handle regulation right, though, that the newer generations are going to have the advantage in this because the internet's just too wide, too again wild of a beast. To quote you, quoting the social media companies earlier, in order for the kind of set mindsets that sort of pervade the older generations.
Right. Yeah. And see that, but that's the other thing too. Like we were talking about regulation or not regulation on these social media companies is really who regulates them, right? Because they have a national reach. So is it
yeah.
the UN that regulates it? I mean, China, obviously, as we all know, the Great Firewall of China, they regulate anything that goes in and out of the country. And that was a big problem with the coronavirus and whether or not it had been here for a year already, or if it did actually just happen. Are their numbers accurate? There was this huge panic of whether or not
Yeah.
what China was reporting to us was factual or not. Um, and they regulate Facebook, they regulate Google, they regulate all these social media sites because of the way China's government runs as a monarchy, um, and
Oligarchy.
oligarchy, yeah.
Yeah.
And so who is it then that with countries like us and like the UK, and how do we go about regulating them? Because over here we have free enterprise where it is a private company and they should be allowed to do whatever they want with their company, but they are able to have this massive influence over the population of the world.
So I'm gonna go libertarian and just say we don't regulate them and we allow for competition to rise up under free market principles.
But
No.
who's the competition, right? Because I know that there's a new social media site called Parler right now. I don't know what it is. I've never seen it. I've never been on it. But immediately, as soon as this thing came out and started getting advertised, I mean, you don't even see advertisements for it on other social media sites because they're trying to extinguish that
Shut it down.
flame.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm already seeing, if you don't like democratic views, then go on Parler because that's where far right people go and share their stupid views because you're ignorant. And there's already this conception or this idea of what this social media site is. It's for far right people to spread their hate.
And you can let them believe that as long as we don't engage in any kind of regulation. I know it's a rough thing to trust things to work out like that, but I mean there
I
are
feel
other alternative sources like Blaze, Daily Wire, Louder with Crowder. Dave Rubin now has his own platform. You know
I
Right.
they
say
exist. You just have to look for them.
you could always make it that defamation becomes illegal in that sense because, like you said, one of their ways of stopping it was to like say, "Oh yeah, well this is what they are," even though they're not. It's defamation,
That's
and
true.
I feel
Hold them
like
to account.
that, yeah, that's something that
But
should be brought up. It's the same with like presidential elections. How many times do you hear the defamation of the other candidate rather than talking about their own policies? They just defamate on someone else's.
that's
Like,
that's
oh,
what this entire presidential election has been. It's been
yeah,
nothing but defaming the other party, and that's it. They have rarely talked about what they're going to do with their policies. The only time that they really did was during the presidential debates, and even then,
yeah,
half their time spent was defaming the other one. And, I mean, watching the presidential debates, I only watched the first one because watching it first, I was like, "Oh, this is hilarious," right? And then I
yeah,
was like, "Oh God, these are the two possibilities of the people running our country." And now I'm really depressed because, like, what is going on? How are these the two best people that we have to offer out of 350 million? Why are these two our only choices? And
yeah. Well,
it's because again,
I never stop laughing.
yeah, yeah, it was terrible, man. But again,
Second one was better, by the way.
the second one was better. I don't know if I want to watch it, man. It's so hard for me, like morally, But
It's a lot better.
the the so then again, the big problem with this and the reason why those are our two candidates is again because of things like the presidential debate commission. That's a private company funded by those two parties. They're the
well,
ones
when
that
you when your policies are not something well enough that you can stand on by themselves and that you have to attack someone else's, there's a problem there. I think there's an issue on that. You should be able to stand on your policies and that be the thing that rises you above the opponent.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
personally, right now, I do think that Republicans stand on their policies, especially in comparison to the radical agendas being proposed by the left as they continue to move left. And that's why I voted Republican. It was for policy reasons.
Yeah. Well, like the Democrat policies, like they sway to whatever side they think will make them win.
Yeah. And
That is true because they're the party of the people, and that's been that way ever since the beginning of the country. If people
Yeah.
try to tell you that there was a policy switch, that's not true. They claim to be the party of the people, and that means that they're gonna be fleeting like the wind in whatever direction they think the votes are.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's and that's just so wrong. Um,
It's
and
happened time and time again that the Democratic Party eats itself because they move in a different direction because that's where they think the votes are. I mean,
Yeah.
it happened, after the Civil War. It happened again in the '60s, and it's happening now again with AOC. The Squad, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And since you kind of brought up voting, and kind of how they've been, they push more towards voting. One of the interesting voting ideas to kind of help ensure more candidates get time and everything, and we ensure that the people are picking the candidate they want. A buddy of mine had suggested ranked voting. And if you're unfamiliar with that is, it's where you say we managed to get 8 candidates into office or who are running, right?
Oh.
What you do is you vote for the one you want the most to the one you want the least, and then you compare. And those that people are like, oh, we definitely don't want these, you can drop them, and then kind of redistribute, and then kind of keep going based on that. So that way, it helps ensure more, more representation towards it, especially if
think-
like.
To me, that sounds a little flimsy though, because you can have the guy that gets half. He's amazing. We love him, and then he gets half of we hate him. We hate him. Don't let him be. And then you've got one that's in the middle the whole time, where it's like, okay, we're okay with him. We rank him at 5 out of 10. Who do you choose at that point? Do you choose the one where half the people are going to be happy and half of them are going to be pissed? Or do you choose the one that's
It's
like,
not. It's not based on like. It's not like you don't choose it based on that. It's just kind of a progressive knockout system. So
Can I bring up the original system again? Because again, firm constitutionalist over here. The original system used to be, whoever got second place in the presidential election would become vice president.
right,
Right,
and that was
right.
that was
I
kind of
thought
a
that was a good system.
I thought that was a great system.
Didn't that stop with if I remember correctly, that stopped after George Washington, like almost immediately that stopped.
Yeah, that was like the fourth election they changed.
I thought
Yeah.
that was like the third or fourth. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And
and so,
he's like,
so that hasn't
"Fuck
been
that."
a part. Like a lot of people don't even know that because it hasn't been a part of our history for an extremely long time. For
Yeah.
95% of as long as the United States has been the United States, nobody knows about this. And I've told
That
people
might be
about
something
this.
worth doing again.
Oh,
Yeah,
totally, yeah. Because what like the whole reason why the
it's forced
founding fathers
cooperation.
wanted that is, yeah, again, forced cooperation, and you also have opposing ideas so that you can, you have a far left and you have a far right or whatever, far libertarian, and then you can kind of work your way and meet in the middle and come to terms with something that's best for everybody involved,
Yeah.
versus just having, absolute Republican or absolute Democratic views.
right.
Yeah.
Well, again, the
but-
system was built for gridlock. The system was built to not accomplish things as a form of check against, ambition. So the only way that you're going to get anything done is if everybody agreed on it. And so
Right.
having the vice president be the tiebreaker in the Senate, but then the president can turn around and veto it. I mean, that's why I think the original system was to have the vice president be whoever came in second, because now they do. Despite the fact that your candidate didn't win, you still have a voice in the Senate. But the fact that your candidate did win means that you have the power to, stop whatever
The
you
Senate
want
won't.
or you don't want to happen, coming out of the Senate. I think it all checks and balances itself perfectly fine. And then someone decided, they didn't like that because things weren't happening, because people assume that things need to happen in the federal government.
I thought it was based on that he didn't like his candidate that was going to work behind him. Like completely, like they were complete opposites, and it wasn't even about whether things could get done or not. It was more of I just don't like you.
Well, I mean, but then
That's
again,
also
that was the
true.
whole point.
That's why
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
So
he
I
said I
mean
want
that
things to be able to get done with people that I like.
I was
So
gonna say, but the thing was, is up to that point, they were civil. Like, elections was like, well, obviously we have differing views, but we know we can work together and get stuff done if it needs to get done. And then it was like, you know what? I don't think we could do that, so we're getting rid of it.
well, see, and I think I think again, with Andrew's beliefs of being, a firm constitutionalist, is that yeah, that I think that they did intend for that to happen to where the federal government really couldn't do anything other than when it regarded national security and the safety of the people. Because they could they can try and pass super far left policies or super far right policies, but it would never get through because of the opposing party that was also involved. But when it
Yep.
came to issues regarding, like I said, national security and the safety of civilians, that they would be able to come to terms and reach an agreement that again would benefit everybody. So I think that yeah, you're right, Andrew, that they did mean for that to happen, so that what's going on now isn't an wasn't an issue, because now we still kind of see that, where we see a Democratic president get into office, and then it's followed by a Republican president, and then whatever that Democratic president did gets reversed by the Republican president over his 8 years, and then it just keeps going on and on. They keep switching back and
yeah, we
forth.
just formed a pendulum.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And it's the same thing that was happening before, except now it also has immediate and long-term effects, versus before a lot of this stuff would have never gotten passed because they had those
Exactly.
opposing views.
But we also are forgetting that when they were creating it, there was never meant to be a two-party system. It was meant to just be, you know, president. It was supposed to be the people that were elected or possibly elected and were running for presidential candidate. That it was just them versus their views, not based on a party system where it was like, oh, it's my party's views, not my views. That was supposed to be the check and balance. Now it's parties check and balancing each other.
right,
Well,
and
this is why I praise the founders, is because despite the fact that this is exactly the opposite of what they wanted, they still set up a system that was directly able to counter that. And
Yep.
even when the system was manipulated and changed to where, now you have a vice president and president both coming from the same ticket,
Yep.
it still stands that no one's able to radically change the government,
Not
which is
unless
just
you
a
can get
testament to their
all of
genius.
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
unless you
which
get
no one's
all of
been
it,
able to
which is
do.
impossible. Yeah, it's almost
That's the whole
impossible.
point.
so, bringing up the radical change of the government, and kind of based on what we're seeing today, one of the interesting questions I thought I would ask you guys is: had the blue wave succeeded, and we would have had a Democratic House, Democratic Senate, Democratic President, do you think that that would have drastically changed the way our government's formed, with the far left kind of intervening in everything Democrats do now?
Well, people say that nothing would have changed, and they reference, the 2008, the Barack Obama party where they did have a supermajority, and
Yeah.
pretty much nothing happened. Uh, but my response to that is that the parties have shifted even more radically since then, and I like to take people at what at their word, at what they say. And so if you just look at literally like what the Democrats have been saying lately, I definitely think that should they have achieved a majority this time, that they would have attempted to institute sweeping changes. I mean, Kamala Harris was very clear when she was on the presidential election train for the primaries. I mean, she
Yep.
was very clear on how radical she was. I mean, she was saying things like, if I become president, the first thing I'm going to do is pass an executive order to do what Congress and the Senate haven't been able to, which is pass gun reform and take people's guns away. You
And if she
know,
were to do that, there's a civil war. I can almost guarantee you that.
Well, and then you've got Democrats in the House and Senate saying, Trump, if you put Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court, we are going to change the court by packing it. And it's like, I like to take people at their word. Maybe they wouldn't have, maybe they would, but
Yeah.
if we assume that people do what they say they're going to do, which is usually not true with politicians, then I think there was a significant danger.
Yeah. I think it's something that would be fearful. And it doesn't even have to be Democrat. If it was like
Yeah, it's
Republican for
any party.
majority, yeah, any party
Well,
when you have it,
Republicans haven't said they want to, so that's
yeah,
my whole point.
yeah,
Yeah,
when
yeah,
it,
but there's a lot of stuff that they do want to that other people in the country don't agree with. Because the Republican Party is seen as the like kind of like the, I guess, the Christian representative, right? They have more Christian morals. Like they're not
yeah,
they're
I think they're moving away from that now, honestly.
they are, yeah,
They
but they were
pro-father.
big they were big pro life advocates. But you didn't really see that during this campaign. But there was in 2016 there was a big talk about abortion during the presidential election.
yeah,
Um, so I mean, it's either way, no matter what party, whether it even be libertarian. If the libertarian had a wave over, a gold wave over the federal government, you would still see the same the same issues that
Yeah,
they have
man,
in
no
all the
more
country.
federal government.
Yeah,
I'm
pretty
down.
much, right? But I mean, they really want zero federal government. But I mean, like I said, I think, like you said, the founding fathers they did it this way specifically so that the federal government is the backbone of freedom in the country, and then from there the states decide everything else, which I'm totally for. But I think that one of the big things too, and that I'm looking at right now, is the different parties on ballots, right, and how they get on the ballots. And so they have to. It says here that they have to get signatures in most of the state, 48 of the states, and two of the states, which are Colorado and Oklahoma. They have to pay a fee to get onto the ballot, or three states. Another, Louisiana's $500. So they have to get enough signatures, and they also have to pay money to certain states to get onto ballots. But I just think, why is that even a thing? Why don't we just have these parties on the ballot? Why is it that they have to pay money to be on the ballot as
Well,
a
there
representative of
has
the
to be a
party?
limit. There's
yeah,
too many. There's too many people out there. Too
Right.
much,
I feel like
diversity.
I feel like you do have to in some way
Just for
prove that
time purposes.
you're a legitimate. I think you have to somehow prove that you're a legitimate party. You can't have the tinfoil hat party where everyone wears tinfoil hats and all they talk about is conspiracy theories, and they're going to put
Well,
you on
how
the
many
ballot.
people in 2016 wrote in Harambe?
Dude, so
Thousands.
many. Yeah, right. It's crazy. See, and that's why that's an option is the writing.
Nine
If people want to be
who
people.
paid the money in those states to get on the ballot?
no, you just write it in. You don't have to be on the ballot.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah,
Um,
you
Nine
can just type
So
it
there
in.
percent.
there are options. You can rally enough support to get write-ins, so you don't even have to pay the fee technically.
Yeah,
I just want to point that out. That is an option.
That's true, yeah. But as you saw, George Jorgensen got 1% of the votes in most of the states. And I know from what Robbie, I just heard him kind of in the background. 9% of the votes in 2016 went to D's nuts.
Yeah,
Okay,
nine
I,
percent.
that's insane. She got 9 times as much as the Libertarian Party this year. That is bananas to me. But a lot of that too, because she didn't have a lot of publicity. Not a lot of people knew about her, and a lot of that was because she was on all 50 ballots, and a lot of people are fed up with the two-party system, and they say, okay, well, I don't want to vote for Trump because blah blah blah, but Biden has dementia and he has no idea what he's doing. And they're like, oh, well, here's Joe Jorgensen, and then a lot of it was mail-in ballots, so they had time to research and look into these things, and so they were looking into Joe Jorgensen, and she got a lot more votes than anticipated because she was on the ballot in all 50 states.
yeah,
And
Hey,
I feel like all legitimate, proven parties that should be allowed to be on the ballots. Like I feel like we should be able to vote on there should be some sort of a process where the people get to decide, okay, well, these parties are going to be on the ballot rather than because, like, for the libertarians being on the ballot, I never heard anything about them being on the ballot. Why don't the Democratic and Republican parties don't have to go through the same process? Because I see nothing on here for them being on the 50 ballots and how they get on it. It's just the minor parties, and that they have to go through this process, but the Republican and Democratic parties don't.
Because they're
Real
so entrenched in that.
Yeah.
Right, and that's absurd. Why? Why is this like this? Why is
Yeah.
it
real
that
quick,
we can't?
Jerome.
Hmm.
I want to say, how dare you suggest that Trump has dementia? I mean, he is out here to
I
fight
said,
for
I
true and
said,
international, against Donald Trump. You know,
oh
so
yeah, oh because
careful.
you said Donald has dementia. I said Joe had dementia.
That was the
Uh,
joke. I think that was
Oh
the joke.
yeah. Okay,
Because
that
he
flew way
said
over
Joe.
my head.
He said, I think he said Joe Trump and stuff like that, right?
I mean, dude. I mean, like so both of them. Okay, as sure as you can agree, Andrew, being a libertarian, is that both of the candidates are absolute mockeries of our country.
Oh yeah.
And the fact, like, we have been the laughing stock of the world for a long time now. Uh,
well, I mean, we still do have the strongest military. No one has yet to mess with us, and I'm actually going to take the counter to that. So I personally believe that we shouldn't be taking these politics so seriously. Um, and so, people say that, Trump and Biden are a mockery, but honestly, I think it's all too serious. I actually kind of like Trump because I find him hilarious.
you do okay, so yeah, he is funny, but he shouldn't be leading our country. I mean, he was
Well,
a
I mean,
TV host or
I don't
whatever,
know about
but
that policy wise. I mean, he's
yeah,
made good
that's
decisions.
because of the Republican Party. That's not all just him. That's
well,
That's
so
true.
people
That's
in the
true.
background telling him, "Hey, say this, say that, and you'll get votes."
Well,
right,
Um,
but besides
can
the
I bring up like
hold on.
perhaps maybe not running for president, but as like Secretary of Treasury, because he's good with money and he's done wonderful things for the
Yeah,
economy.
I would love to have Trump as a Secretary of Treasury because he is a businessman, and we should have someone who is a
Well, if you want
business.
to talk about foreign policy, I mean, Trump has had some of the greatest foreign policy victories
Oh
of any
yeah,
president in recent history. I mean, look at
and,
peace in the Middle East, man.
North
You know,
Korea.
so again,
and
I have to disagree. I actually do like Trump as a presidential candidate. I think he
I
made
think
a
what he
lot
did
of
was
good choices, and he was good at doing deals in
and I
foreign policy, like renegotiating the North American trade agreement.
and I have to agree
yeah,
with Andrew on that because of how charismatic he is. He was probably a better presidential candidate than some of the other ones. Now in
Better than I
2016,
expected.
yeah, in
Yeah, that's true.
2016, I saw him as kind of like, oh, that's just a joke, you know.
Same.
But
And then he
based on some of
won.
the, he won, and then he surprised me with how savvy some of these policies were because they really benefited us. I mean, you look at the economy today versus what it was in 2010, and we are thriving comparatively.
oh yeah. The only dumb move that I've really seen him make was the wall.
Why is that?
That
Mm,
to me,
yeah, why is that?
So I want to hear Zach talk about this because I have my own opinion on the wall. That's not super popular amongst Hispanic people, but I really want to see what your argument is about it.
okay, my argument against it is just I feel like it's useless. Like I know that it's supposed to like lower illegals from coming over and everything, but we all know that they'll find ways around it, and I know that it's easy to just pay off people to allow you to get across. Uh, I I feel like there could have been better ways to handle it, more like making it more accessible to come over here legally, as such as like that, and then to make the broad statement that Mexico is going to pay for it. Don't get me wrong, I believe they're paying for it. I don't believe the country itself is paying for it. I think the cartel is paying for it to get rights to come over here without being caught, so that way they can keep, you know, getting money for coyotes to get them
Well,
across.
Well, and
see,
their drugs, sell
Yeah,
for a ton back on the black market by the CIA. So that funds
oh
a
yeah.
lot.
yeah,
So here's the problem with that though, okay, right? So if you're paying people off a lot of the times, unless there's some sort of federal conspiracy where they're just having the cartel pay them money to the government in cash,
yeah,
so then and they let them across the border. Those are the border patrol officers themselves
yeah.
that are taking that money. The government's getting none of that in theory. Um, so I think.
Well, I
My
meant
my
confiscation of
opinion,
money.
huh?
They confiscate a ton. They confiscate a ton of drugs and money for the federal government.
They do, yeah.
That
So,
was my point.
oh, okay, I see what you're saying. But so my opinion on the wall is the total opposite. I think the wall is a great idea. Okay, and this is even coming from my dad who hates Trump. He's straight from Mexico. He came across here illegally and worked his way to citizenship, right? Um, I think we should have reform on immigration legally to where it is easier than what it is now for people to get in. So there's not such as long of a wait. We focus a little more on it to where the process is faster. We can process people a little bit
Yeah,
quicker, so it's not years and years that they're waiting to get a citizenship. Um, but the wall itself is a good physical barrier because if you didn't have that wall, then people would just literally drive across. And it's a
Well, and
but
vast border.
people try to compare it to like Europe, where they have open borders, but people also have to realize that all of the European countries are relatively equal. There's no
They're
strong.
a part of the United Kingdom.
What? No, no, I'm talking
No,
about like France, Germany. Like the actual main
they're
Right,
body of
they're.
Europe.
right.
Yeah, are you talking about like prosperity wise? They're all equal, or are
Yeah,
you talking
yeah.
no.
about?
There's no strong desire for people to go from Germany to like Sweden, en masse.
Because they're all
So
Yeah,
first
that's
world countries.
this exactly. So that's something that people aren't taking into account when they make that kind of argument. Is that we are a desirable place to be.
yes,
Not just that. When you look at the size of Europe compared to the size of the U.S., Germany,
That too.
France, and all those other countries are more like states than they are countries in comparison.
Oh
So
yeah.
it'd be like us going, "Hey, I don't want to live in Oregon anymore. Let's go move to Indiana." Or in Andrew's case, I don't really want to stay in Indiana. Let me go back to Kansas. Or you know, it's
I'm staying in Indiana.
Yeah,
I'm
no, and
not,
that's a really good point too. But I mean, and that's the thing. I got a lot of flack, man. My sister constantly calls me racist because of my point of views. Uh, that
Which
I
is funny because usually people that immigrate legally are against illegal immigration. So the fact that
yeah.
your dad worked his way into being a legal citizen of the country, I would imagine would make him want to, stop illegal immigration. Although I guess, how exactly did he get his citizenship, if you don't mind me asking?
So I don't know the
Apply
entirety of the
for it, or
details. So
was it like
he
DACA or something?
um he worked through he worked in a ranch in Texas and he like kind of took oddball jobs all around and he just pretty much married into it. He found my mom and they
Right.
married and they
Okay.
had kids. Um, but he is against illegal immigrations because he knows he grew up in Mexico. He knows what comes with illegal immigration. It comes with human trafficking, drug trafficking. And he's not worried about Mexicans taking his job. He's worried about the negative effects that come onto the community from kids being kidnapped, from drugs being brought into communities, and all these other problems that come along with it that nobody takes into account. All they're
yep,
doing is putting this,
Exactly.
this blanket statement of, oh, well, these people are in a third world country and they need our help and we should help them. So let's just let them all in. Let's open the borders and whoever wants to come can come. And then
Or,
and then
they claim that you're a monster if you don't want that because then you're putting kids in cages, despite the fact that, their party was the one that started that policy.
yeah, and that's the
That's
whole
the
thing
stuff
that
that drives
blows
me
my mind
crazy.
too. Is that I've had that argument with multiple people where they're like, "Oh, Trump's garbage because he put children in cages and he separated them from their families." And I was like, "Okay, well, one, a lot of the times the reason why they get separated from their family is because it's not actually their family, and
Nope.
these kids have been kidnapped, and they totally pass over that fact. They also I also would say, oh well, Obama did this as well, and then their counter argument to that as well, Trump's doing it worse. So Obama's the good guy. It blows my mind that this is the
yeah,
mindset of the far
Well,
left.
it's by that same argument, right? That makes Hitler a good guy because he didn't kill nearly as many people as Stalin
Yeah,
or
that's
Mao.
that's true. And he was also
Jesus.
he was also a guy for the people, and he wanted higher wages and he wanted everyone to own a car.
I'm not even going that far. I was just, based off that own twisted logic.
Yeah, it's stupid, man. It um it just makes no sense. And I feel like, the baseline of all of this and what, we've been talking about this whole time is that we need to hold these people in power accountable for what they're doing. And I firmly believe in term limits for Congress. And, like, why is it that Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden can be in politics for 40 plus years?
because no one has opposed them in their district and won.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Honestly, I mean, I'm for term limits too. Before I go into this, I just again I tend to play the devil's advocate here, I guess.
and I get what
Um,
you're saying too,
I'm
but
glad you chose to.
that also goes back to what you were saying before, where we're not educated on our local government and who we're electing into the Senate, who we're electing into Congress.
so I
Um,
blame the people for letting Pelosi stay in government for 47 years.
yeah, she's a monster, dude.
Did you see
It's
her meltdown on CNN?
Did she what?
Did you see her meltdown on CNN at Wolf Blitzer over
No.
the COVID
No.
relief? Yeah, take a minute, just watch that. It's pretty funny.
Oh yeah, and then that was the other thing too, is that Trump was a huge advocate for more, stimulus checks throughout COVID-19, which again I don't think was a good idea. I don't think the first stimulus checks were a good idea. I don't think the CARES Act was a good idea because all that money was borrowed from the Federal Reserve at an interest rate that we're going to eventually have to pay back, and it was trillions of dollars. It was a huge
Well,
problem.
if you're gonna shut down the economy, you have to. So again, libertarian, I don't think any of that should have happened. But
No,
personally,
I
I
don't
don't
think
think
we
the
should have shut
economy
down
should have shut down in the first place.
because nobody was talking about how okay the equivalent of the government coming in and saying nobody is allowed to work, nobody's allowed to go out and do anything in social gatherings, everyone has to wear a mask and stay put
Yeah, so
for
you kind
for
of have
two
to
weeks
have stimulus checks under those circumstances.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, but it's the concept of saying this and the response they had for COVID-19 is like saying, okay, well, hey, Zach unfortunately ended up coming down with cancer and they're going through chemotherapy, so they're immunocompromised right now and it's flu season. So everybody in the United States needs to wear a mask so that he doesn't get sick and die.
We're
Whereas,
not debating whether or not the lockdowns were ridiculous. I'm just saying that if we're going to have lockdowns, then I understand the need for stimulus checks, despite
Yeah.
personally being against them. That was my whole input on that.
Yeah.
right,
I agree with you. The lockdowns were ridiculous. In the first, I'm a microbiology major, right? I've got a degree in microbiology, so I'm gonna throw that out as a some form of authority, I guess.
right,
But it just none of this made any sense from a scientific standpoint. And if you actually follow, what the different organizations were saying about COVID, they didn't know anything about it either. And so you had constant policy switches and constant recommendation switches as we learn new things because that's how it works, but people don't take that into account. They just assume, oh well, they should have known what to do from the beginning and then they could have saved lives and da da da, but that's not how any of this works.
right.
Yeah. Well, you know what they say. Like history will forgive you for being over cautious, but it'll never forgive you for not reacting.
Fair enough.
So, but the
Yeah.
reason why I brought up the stimulus checks again was that the pure hatred between the Democrat and the Republican Party is that like I was saying, Trump was an advocate for continuous stimulus checks throughout the COVID-19 shutdown until we figured out what was going on, and Nancy Pelosi and I forget who I think it was. I'm probably wrong about this, but I think it was also Bernie Sanders fought against it because they didn't want Trump to look good before the presidential election.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think we can say that for sure. I mean, you can definitely speculate that. I think there's plenty of evidence, to lead to that speculation. But I do think we need to be a little cautious on making declarative statements like that.
Right. But I mean, yeah, it's just it's insane to me. Like, why? What other reason would they not want to do it? Because
Yeah.
they're the ones calling for the shutdown, and yet they don't want to offer aid
well,
to those affected by the shutdown.
because then you'll be poor, and if you're poor, they'll be able to tell you they'll make it better, and then when they make it better, they'll say, "See, now give us more power," and then it's a slow and kind of twisted turn on on Stalinism, and not even Stalinism, more Leninism.
Well, it's the same cycle that's been in place since the Great Depression in the 1930s and 40s, or sorry, 1940s, and the advent of the welfare state. It's the same cycle the Democrats have been using for 80 years at this
Oh
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually about to bring that up when you said that. That's totally true. All these socialist programs that we have, like welfare and unemployment, are reasons for.
Again,
I mean, not necessarily
the
unemployment, it's
original
a state thing.
the original Democrats, right, had proposed a sort of agrarian justice policy, which would have involved a like minimum standard of living. So, I mean,
Yeah.
again, these are all things that people don't realize, but we've been talking about the same stuff for 200 something odd years.
Right.
With no
And
actual
it's
solution. With no
and it,
actual solution.
well, my point is,
You cut out, buddy.
You cut out.
people have been saying there's Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Saying that there was a switch or something like that, and it's like, well, no, not really. I mean, again, they, like I said before, they were always quote unquote for the people. It's just who they saw, quote
As
unquote the
the
people
people.
as has changed. That's really all it was. And so when they saw an opportunity to take advantage of new black voters after they gained the ability to vote, I mean, that's literally just what happened. They said, well, we can take care of you, with the welfare state, and you should just keep voting for us. It's the same thing that happened since the very beginning when, they used to advent for the farmers, the white farmers that were all over the place.
Right. Yeah. What
Exactly the same.
their party's demographic is the lowest common denominator because those are the easiest people to persuade.
Yeah. Well, I honestly think that was great. I think this has been really eye opening, if
A
anything.
lot of good points, and a lot of points that I come more from a conservative Republican side of view, same as Zach. So coming and hearing from two libertarians who don't necessarily see the same thing, especially with talking about reforming of the Constitution, this was all really great discussion, and I'm glad that you guys came on and had this discussion with us.
Yeah, I want to thank you for
Yeah, dude.
your ideals. I appreciate you sharing them
Um,
openly and not feeling afraid to.
Yeah, I just want to point out, right? It's interesting that with the Republican Party, the people inside that party all agree on the same things or disagree. Same thing with the Democratic Party. But here with the Libertarians, me and Andrew don't agree on everything because it's more of an open ended thing where,
We actually agreed on very little, I think.
yeah, we really did.
I was going to say, I think it's the same with Republicans, though. I think, and Democrats, is that we all, like, we have the general idea of what we want, but we all see different ways of doing it. And
Exactly.
ideas. And I think there's a lot of infighting because of it, but I feel like how you guys handled it, I felt like you guys got along a lot better than
right,
most.
it was more of a discussion than what we
It's
try
an
to avoid,
argument.
which is
Yeah. You were not
Yeah.
trying to kill each other.
Definitely try and get like a leftist or a liberal on here, because I think that would be fascinating. Especially since you both admit to being more conservative.
I could easily find you, and I'll see if I don't know. My best friend's mom is a psychologist, and she's super far left, so maybe I can talk her into it.
That'd be wonderful. I was trying with one, and they opted out last minute.
And
They're
then
like,
the
no.
some of the people that I know that are on the left are the type of people that you bring them on, and then you challenge their view, and then it turns into a yelling match.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and you don't want that.
All of the conversations I have with the left currently have just been immediately shut down.
Right, and
It's really sad. I can't even have discussions with people because they just automatically assume I'm coming from a negative place and that my whole goal is to like troll them or something.
Yeah.
Right,
Like,
and
no,
that's-
I mean, it turns into that because you keep insulting me, but like, it started off as an honest discussion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the same thing with like I stopped arguing with people on Facebook because it's just too much. And
Yeah.
how, like you were saying, getting called racist on Facebook because you contradicted what they were saying. Like, how is this thing you've taken out of context considered this? And then they're like, well, you're just an idiot, this, that, and the other, and it's just this whole pointing
You
fingers
just have
match.
you have to take it in stride, man. I'm telling you, if they call you a racist, you tell them, "Hey, you're a horrible person for suggesting that because you don't know anything about me."
Oh, I
I mean,
do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
literally,
I
it's
just
the
think
only way to do. But
I
you
just
You
can't
think
stop
guys,
the fight,
you guys
you
also have
know.
the benefit of like someone calls you racist, you go, "Oh, that's funny," because I'm of a different,
see,
I'm
No, don't
a
say
person of
person
slang
of
color.
down,
but
Rodney.
it's
POC, a
hard.
person
Don't
of
say
color.
slang down.
But it's
I will
but
defend you.
yeah, but it's hard because like we were saying before, is you say that and they're like, oh, well, you're just internalizing your
Racism.
your white supremacy, and
Tell them they're
you're not really
internalizing their
pushing
stupidity.
for
You know.
Um, yeah, and
Like if I was
and
a white supremacist at this point, I would have come over there and I would have made sure to show you that I was a white supremacist. I'm not gonna do it online.
They don't hide. White supremacists don't hide.
no, they
Yeah, they
don't.
don't.
I mean, if Andrew, if you remember the first time we met, it was complete shock over.
Yeah.
I invited him over to play a game or play some Star Wars D&D, and I thought I had been talking to this guy I'd met at the store, and I walk in the house because I went to go pick up, or I went to let these other family into the gate because I was staying on the army base, and you have to go through the gate, and if you have visitors, they have to go through this whole process. So I
Uh-huh.
come into my house, and Andrew is sitting there, and I'm like, "Oh, you're a lot browner than I thought you would be." I was like, I was
The name
honestly a little
Andrew.
confused because it was a completely different Andrew.
Right. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, man, is everybody has that bias, whether it's good or bad. Like that's you having that bias isn't negative, but you had that bias where you thought he was
Yeah.
going to be a certain way.
Hey, if it helps you cope with your white supremacy, you can call me Andres. You know.
Wow.
It was like, but but it wasn't. See, and now if I were to tell that to some of my liberal friends, they would have been like, "Man, you're a white supremacist. How could you even say something?" But when I said that to Andrew, and he laughed it off, and we laughed, and we had a great session, and now we're pretty good friends, like because this idea that white supremacists are just hiding inside of everyone is just insane,
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
and it's but
It's a bad way to think because then everyone becomes your enemy rather than seeing them as a possibility of a friend. As a
Yeah,
friend.
Again,
everyone's just
I'd love
people,
to
man.
see you guys.
Yeah.
I'd love to see you guys link that video that I posted on Facebook about the black guy that hung out with the KKK, because I mean that's like the truest video right now. As soon
Oh,
as you stop,
the guy who converted a bunch of KKK members.
yeah, as soon as you stop talking to people, that's when the violence starts, right? So
Yeah.
we can't stop having these discussions. We can't stop engaging people on Facebook. That was my point earlier, is because as soon as you stop that, and there's absolutely no more breaking of the echo chambers, then that's when stuff really devolves
Well, see,
into
right.
I'm actually going to counter that because I think in person, face to face discussions, that really works. But when it comes to online, like I was saying with that post in the old city I used to live in, right? I said one thing that contradicted what this lady was saying, and I got attacked by 20, 30 people all at once, and there
just
was
stand
nobody.
your ground.
Uh,
That's what I did. But it's just so time consuming for me to be
It's
spending
This
all
is
my
true.
time on Facebook arguing with
Right.
these people, and then I'm
it's
not even nothing
Unfortunately,
even
that's the
comes with it.
platform, though.
and,
That's
and
the
you're forgetting one other thing. You said it was a woman, correct?
Yeah,
It was a lady. You forgot that she has an army of simps waiting by her side to defend her on
that is
everything.
true. I always forget
Uh,
about the simp army.
Yeah, the simp army's
oh,
strong.
we don't gotta go there.
We we won't go there,
My whole
Andrew.
point though is that again, this is something that I'm going to go back to Ben Shapiro, because he's been a real hero to me in these times, because he's not afraid to say what he wants to say.
Yes.
And whether or not I agree with everything he has to say, I think that's a great mentality. And what he said is that when you engage with these people online whose whole goal is to shut you down, so that you can't talk anymore, I mean, that's when you have to be at your fiercest. That's when you have to be at your strongest, and you have to engage people, because it's not about the person that you're talking to. right? That's what you got to understand when you're on social media, at least, right? When you're in face to face, be reasonable with people, have an honest discussion. But when you're on social media, if people start attacking you, you have to fight back, because it's not about those people. It's about all the other people who are going to see that. Because the way
Yeah.
Facebook works, right, is if you're talking with somebody, let's say you comment on their post, right, they've got 200 other friends whose that post is going to show up on their timeline. And so, you may not convince them, you may not convince the army of simps, but the hope is that if two of their friends out there have their echo chamber broken and are even open to discussion in the future, then you've won.
And so,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
here's the other problem is that a majority of people are open minded.
Yeah.
It's the problem is that these small echo chambers of people who are super hard headed and closed minded are the loudest.
Yeah.
Well, it's the it it's definitely a it's like you said, because they're so hard headed, it becomes a challenge and it becomes time consuming. Um, one of the, and like Andrew said, you break through one or two, that really helps. But one of the big things that you really need to do as well is kind of maintain that what you're saying doesn't contradict. Because when I get into arguments with some people, especially on the left, right?
You got to be
Um,
careful with what you say. That's for sure.
right,
Yeah,
because if you slip up even the slightest bit, they'll just spiral that out of control. You go to amend your statement, because you realize you said it a way that, and I struggle with that sometimes. I'll say things kind of not the way that I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I don't, I and because they're hard headed, they're going to capitalize on that. So one of the things that, and one of the people I listen to, Jordan Peterson, does this amazingly. He'll start talking, and he'll never contradict himself, and he'll never state something that he doesn't fully back. And that's something that we when you have these conversations and you're trying to have these discussions, try and maintain that, because when you break down, that's when they capitalize, and that echo chamber really starts to feel like you're never going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
right.
And I'll point out the point, or the reason that I'm so adamant for this is that, again, going back to the Constitution, I believe it's our civic responsibility to engage in this discourse so that we're educated enough to vote, and so that the people around us are also educated enough to vote. So I think the civil discourse is, a constitutional responsibility for every
Yeah.
citizen.
You cut off. You cut off.
Right. I I just want to add one last thing before we end this. 'Cause we've been doing this for like what 3 hours now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oof, that's crazy, dude. It was a fun conversation though. But
Yeah.
with what Robbie was saying about how having to be careful about what you say and saying the wrong thing or contradicting yourself is that the issue and the reason why I've kind of stopped this on Facebook. I have these debates in person all the time, and you can ask Zach. I'll debate anybody at work.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But the issue is that this is online and you don't have body language, you don't have the way people talk to help you figure out what they're trying to get across, right? It's easy to look at a piece of text and 10 different people will get 10 different ideas of what they're saying, and that's a problem.
Well,
Uh,
there's that, and then there's the no fear of consequences as well. Because like
Right,
in
because
person.
you're behind a screen, nothing happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest issue, and why, for me personally, I've kind of tried to avoid this as much as possible. I still do have debates with people on Facebook sometimes, but I really try to avoid it because of that specific reason. Is that the people will always misconstrue what you're trying to say based on their bias because it's not your bias, and they don't really understand what you're trying to say, and so they take it a different way and they run with it, and then, oh, that's exactly what you meant because this is what you said, it's right here in text. um, I think that's a big problem, is the miscommunication between text versus in-person communication. It's vastly different and it causes miscommunication. And I think that's a problem with social media in general.
Right, and
I
you're
agree.
absolutely right. Is it's easy to miscommunicate.
Oh yeah.
It's super easy. Um, so I think that kind of wraps this discussion up for now. Thank you again, Andrew and Jerome. You guys' input was extremely unique, especially considering it, like you guys said, coming from a similar viewpoint but differing more than me and Zach coming from a differing from the same viewpoint is nice to hear. And we'd love to have you guys back sometime. So,
Yeah, man. Let me know.
Yeah, I
Sounds good.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
all right. Well, that was the Gentleman's Jury, and again, I was your host, Robbie,
That was your co-host, Zach.
and we'll see you next time.
Have a wonderful one.